Chapter 1. The old school building of Kuoh Academy had always carried a strange hush after sunset, but tonight the silence felt different, thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Issei Hyoudou noticed it the moment he stepped through the door of the Occult Research Club, his footsteps swallowed by a quiet that seemed to press in from every direction. He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward the far side of the room, where Rias Gremory stood over her desk, frowning at a magic circle that pulsed weakly on its surface. "Something wrong with the barrier again, Bucho?" Issei asked, setting down the stack of paperwork Akino had asked him to deliver. He had grown used to odd fluctuations in the club room. Kuoh sat atop layers of old ley lines, and stray energy sometimes bled through from the underworld, from fairy tale realms, from places nobody could quite name. Usually it was nothing more than a flickering light, or a chair sliding an inch across the floor. "I am not sure yet," Rias said, her crimson hair catching the low lamplight as she leaned closer to the circle. "This pattern is not one I recognize. It does not match any transportation array we use, and it is not decaying the way a corrupted spell should. It is almost as if something is trying to open a door rather than close one." Issei crossed the room and peered over her shoulder, careful, as always, to keep a respectful distance even though every instinct in his body wanted to lean closer to her. The circle glowed a pale, sickly yellow, unlike the usual scarlet of Gremory magic or the violet the Citri family favored. Thin cracks of light ran along its edge, pulsing in a slow, uneven rhythm, like something breathing. "It kind of looks like it is waiting for someone," he said, only half joking. Rias did not laugh. She reached out with one hand, fingers hovering just above the surface, testing the flow of magic without touching it directly. "There is a presence behind this. Faint but present. It feels old, Issei. Older than anything I have encountered in this town." The lamp on her desk flickered. Once, twice, and then steadied. "Maybe we should call Akino," Issei suggested, taking a half step back. "Or Kiba. This feels like the kind of thing we probably should not poke at alone." "You are usually the first one to poke at things," Rias said, a small smile finally breaking through her concentration. "Are you telling me the great Hyoudou is finally learning caution?" "Hey, I have learned plenty of caution," Issei protested. "I just apply it selectively." That earned a quiet laugh from her, and for a moment the strange tension in the room eased. Rias straightened, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and reached for the small notebook she used to record anomalies. It was a habit she had picked up from her brother, who insisted that even the most powerful devils could be undone by carelessness with the unknown. She never got the chance to write anything down. The moment her pen touched the page, the circle beneath the desk flared with blinding light, and the pale yellow glow rushed upward like a wave breaking over the room. Issei barely had time to shout her name before the light swallowed them both, and the familiar walls of the Occult Research Club dissolved into nothing. For a long moment there was no sound at all. No wind, no heartbeat, no breath. Issei felt weightless, suspended in a place with no floor and no sky, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation ended, and gravity returned to him with a jolt that drove the air from his lungs. He hit a floor that did not feel like the wooden boards of the club room. It was carpet, damp and slightly spongy beneath his palms, and it smelled faintly of mildew and old dust. He pushed himself up onto his knees, blinking against a light that buzzed somewhere above him, harsh and yellow, and looked around at a room that should not have existed. The walls stretched in every direction, papered in a faded yellow pattern that repeated over and over with no variation, broken only by identical fluorescent lights humming along the ceiling. The carpet beneath him was the same dull, sickly shade, patterned with dark stains that had long since dried. There were no windows. There were no doors that he could see, only more wall, more carpet, more light, extending into a haze in every direction like the entire world had been reduced to a single, endless room. "Bucho?" His voice came out smaller than he intended, swallowed almost instantly by the low buzz of the lights. "Rias?" A groan answered him from somewhere to his left, and he scrambled over to find Rias pushing herself up onto one elbow, her red hair fanned out against the yellow carpet in a way that looked almost surreal against the drab surroundings. She winced, pressing a hand to her temple, and Issei was at her side in an instant, one hand hovering near her shoulder, unsure whether it was appropriate to help her up or whether she would rather do it herself. "I am fine," she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual composure. She let him take her hand anyway, and he pulled her gently to her feet. Once upright, she swayed for a moment, and Issei kept a steadying grip on her arm until she found her balance. Rias looked around slowly, her sharp mind clearly working through what she was seeing, cataloging details the way she always did before jumping to conclusions. Issei had seen that expression on her face during strategy meetings before raiding games, and it reassured him more than he expected it to. If Rias was thinking instead of panicking, then whatever this place was, it was not beyond understanding. "This is not anywhere I recognize," she finally said. "Not the Underworld, not any pocket dimension I have studied. The air feels wrong. There is magic here, but it does not respond the way it should." As if to test her own words, she raised a hand and summoned a small orb of destruction magic, the crimson light gathering between her fingers the way it always did, effortless and familiar. But instead of hovering steady in her palm, the orb flickered weakly, sputtering like a candle in a draught, and dissolved entirely after only a few seconds. "That has never happened before," she said quietly, staring at her empty hand. Issei felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He glanced down at his own hand, and after a brief hesitation, called out to the gauntlet that had never once failed him. "Boosted gear!" The crimson gauntlet answered his call, materializing around his left forearm in a burst of green light, the jeweled eye set into its back glowing faintly. Relief flooded through him, quickly followed by unease, because the voice that usually accompanied its appearance, deep and proud and impossible to ignore, did not come. "Drake?" Issei said, lifting the gauntlet closer to his face. "You there, partner?" Silence answered him. Not the comfortable silence of a dragon choosing not to speak, but something heavier, as though a door somewhere deep inside him had been quietly shut. He called out again, louder this time, and still there was nothing, only the low hum of the fluorescent lights stretching endlessly overhead. "He is not responding," Issei said, and for the first time since waking on that damp yellow carpet, real fear crept into his voice. "Bucho, Drake is not answering me." Rias placed a hand on his arm, and though her own composure was clearly strained, her voice remained steady, grounding him the way it always had since the day she saved his life. "Then we will figure out why together. Whatever this place is, it is suppressing our power, not destroying it. That is important. It means there is a rule here, and rules can be understood." Issei took a breath, forcing his racing heart to slow, and nodded. "Right. Okay. We find the rule, we find the way out." He looked around again at the endless yellow walls, the identical lights, the carpet that swallowed every echo of their voices, and tried to ignore the creeping sense that the room itself was watching them, patient and unblinking, waiting to see what they would do next. "Any idea which direction we should even try?" he asked. Rias turned in a slow circle, studying the uniform walls with a critical eye, the same way she studied an opponent's formation before a raiding game. None of these directions looked different from any other. But standing still accomplishes nothing. We walk, we observe, and we remain together no matter what happens. Do you understand me, Issei? No matter what we see, no matter what we hear, we do not separate. There was something in the way she said it, an edge of fear beneath the authority, that told Issei this instruction was not merely tactical. He met her eyes and nodded firmly. "Together. I promise." She held his gaze a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them, and then turned toward the nearest stretch of identical wall, squaring her shoulders in the way she always did before facing down an enemy far larger than herself. "Then let us find out what kind of place has dared to trap a Gremory," she said, and started walking. Issei fell into step beside her, the gauntlet still humming faintly and uselessly on his arm, and together they left the small circle of carpet where they had fallen, moving deeper into a maze of identical rooms that seemed to stretch on without end, the buzzing lights above them the only sound in a silence that pressed down like a held breath. They walked for what felt like an hour, though either of them could be certain, since neither watch nor phone gave any reading that made sense. Issei's phone screen showed only static, a faint yellow tint bleeding across the display no matter how many times he tried to restart it. Rias's magical communication mirror fared no better, its surface clouding over the instant she tried to summon a connection to the clubhouse. The rooms shifted only slightly as they went, an occasional doorway here, a slight bend in the corridor there, but the overall impression remained the same. Yellow walls. Damp carpet. Humming lights. It was disorienting in a way that made Issei's skin crawl, the sameness itself becoming a kind of threat. Reminder that they had no way of knowing whether they were making progress or simply walking in a slow, meaningless circle. Bucho, Issei said eventually, breaking a silence that had stretched long enough to feel unbearable. Do you have any theories? About what this place actually is? Rias walked a few more steps before answering, her eyes scanning the walls as though searching for a pattern only she could sense. There are old stories, fragments really, passed down among certain devil families, about spaces that exist between worlds. Not the underworld, not the human world, not even the fallen angel or angel realms. Places that were never meant to be inhabited, that exist only because reality needed somewhere to put its excess. Excess? Issei repeated, uneasy. Think of it like the space behind a wall, Rias said. It exists because the wall exists, but it was never designed to be a room. Sometimes, when the boundaries between worlds grow thin, things slip through the cracks and end up in that unintended space. I did not think such places were real, not truly. I thought they were myths meant to frighten young devils into respecting the boundaries between realms. Well, Issei said, glancing at the endless yellow stretching in every direction, I guess the myths were right to be scary. A soft, wet sound echoed from somewhere behind them, faint but unmistakable, like something heavy dragging itself across damp carpet. Both of them froze instantly, and Issei's hand shot out on reflex, closing gently around Rias's wrist, pulling her half a step closer to him without thinking. She did not pull away. Do not move, she whispered, her earlier claim about identical walls forgotten in the face of the sound repeating, closer now, from a direction that made no sense given the layout of the corridor behind them. Issei's gauntlet flared weakly, the jewel pulsing once, twice, as if straining against whatever force smothered its power in this place. He held his ground, positioning himself slightly in front of Rias without conscious thought, every instinct honed by years of training and love screaming at him to protect her first and think second. The sound faded as slowly as it had come, retreating into the buzzing silence until only the fluorescent hum remained. Neither of them moved for a long moment afterward, listening, waiting, until Rias finally exhaled and allowed herself to relax by a fraction. We need to find shelter, she said quietly. Somewhere we can rest without being exposed on every side. This place clearly is not empty, and we cannot keep walking blind forever. Issei nodded, though he kept his hand loosely around her wrist a moment longer than necessary before finally releasing it, feeling oddly bereft the instant he did. Yeah. Let us find somewhere safer. And Bucho. Yes? Whatever that thing was, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady, it is not getting anywhere near you. I promised we would stay together, and I meant it. I am not losing you in some place that does not even have a name. For just a moment, something soft and grateful flickered across Rias's expression, quickly hidden behind her usual composed calm, but not quickly enough that Issei missed it entirely. Then let us make sure either of us has to test that promise, she said, and together they pressed onward, deeper into the humming yellow maze, searching for any place that might resemble safety. Chapter 2. The corridors eventually gave way to something different, a wider room lined with rows of identical doors, each one painted the same faded yellow as the walls around it. Issei counted at least 20 before losing track, all of them closed, all of them silent, and none of them marked in any way that suggested where they might lead. This is new, he said, turning slowly to take in the full scope of the room. You think one of these actually goes somewhere? Possibly, Rias said, though caution weighed heavy in her voice. Or possibly none of them do. A place like this may not follow rules the way we expect doors to work. Issei approached the nearest one anyway, resting his palm against its surface. It felt exactly like every other surface in this place, faintly damp, faintly warm, as though something on the other side breathed against the wood. He hesitated, glancing back at Rias, who gave a small, reluctant nod. He turned the handle and pushed the door open. Beyond it lay another identical room, Yellow walls, humming lights, damp carpet, stretching away into the same directionless haze as everywhere else. Issei let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and closed the door again, more disappointed than surprised. Figures, he muttered. They tried 3 more doors with the same result before Rias called a halt, pressing 2 fingers against her temple as though warding off a headache. This could take forever if we open every one at random. We need a better method. Any suggestions? Issei asked. Give me a moment. She closed her eyes, and Issei watched as faint traces of crimson light gathered weakly around her fingertips again, this time controlled with obvious effort, a fraction of her normal strength forced into something delicate and precise. A thin thread of magic extended from her hand, drifting through the air like a compass needle searching for true north, before settling toward a door at the far end of the row, one that looked, to Issei's eyes, no different from any of the others. There, Rias said, opening her eyes, faint strain visible around them. That one carries a different resonance. Weaker interference from whatever suppresses our magic. It might lead somewhere less hostile. Or somewhere worse, Issei pointed out, though he was already moving toward it. Or somewhere worse, Rias agreed grimly. But we cannot simply stand here waiting for an answer to present itself. Action, even uncertain action, is better than paralysis. Issei reached the door and paused, glancing back at her. Together, right? Together, she confirmed, stepping up beside him. He pushed it open, and this time, the room beyond was different. The space stretched wider than any they had encountered so far, its ceiling lost somewhere above the reach of the buzzing lights, and instead of bare yellow walls, the room was lined with rows of old, water-damaged shelving, stacked with boxes that had long since collapsed into soft, unreadable mounds of cardboard and dust. The carpet here had given way to cold concrete, and the air carried a chill that raised goosebumps along Issei's arms. This looks like some kind of storage level, Rias murmured, stepping inside cautiously, her eyes sweeping the shadowed rows for any sign of movement. Issei followed close behind, his gauntlet raised slightly, though its glow remained faint and unreliable. At least it is a change of scenery. I was starting to think we would be looking at yellow wallpaper for the rest of our lives. Do not tempt whatever governs this place, Rias said, though the corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. It has already proven it enjoys being contrary. They moved between the rows slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile towers of collapsed boxes on either side, and Issei found himself acutely aware of every sound, every shift of air, every faint creak of settling shelving that might or might not be something worse creeping closer. He kept himself half a step ahead of Rias at all times, a position she did not argue against, which told him more about how frightened she truly was than any words could have. Issei, she said quietly after a while, may I ask you something honestly, without you deflecting with a joke? He blinked, glancing back at her. Yeah? Of course, Bucho. Are you afraid? She asked, her violet eyes steady on his despite the dim light. I do not mean it as a criticism. I only wish to know if I am the only one struggling to keep my composure. Issei considered lying, considered making a joke to lighten the mood the way he usually did, but something about the honesty in her voice made that feel wrong. Yeah, he admitted. I am scared. Drake not answering scares me more than almost anything has in a long time. But I am more scared of something happening to you than I am of anything in these walls. So I am trying to focus on that instead of the fear, if that makes sense. Rias was quiet for a moment, studying him in a way that made him feel strangely exposed. It makes a great deal of sense, she finally said. I find myself doing something similar. Every time my mind wanders toward how frightened I am, I think instead of making sure you stay safe, and it becomes easier to keep walking. Guess we are both idiots then, Issei said, a small, tired smile tugging at his mouth. Worrying about each other instead of ourselves. Perhaps, Rias said, and this time her own smile reached her eyes, brief but genuine. Though I have never minded being an idiot in that particular way. They continued deeper into the storage level, the shelves eventually giving way to an open area where the concrete floor sloped gently downward, leading toward what looked, impossibly, like the edge of still, dark water stretching out beyond the reach of the lights. Issei stopped at the edge, staring into water that showed no reflection at all, not of the ceiling above, not of himself, not of Rias standing beside him. That is not right, he said slowly. No, Rias agreed, crouching to study the water's surface without touching it. It is not. I would advise against going anywhere near it. As if in answer to her caution, the water rippled once, gently, though nothing had touched it, and a low sound rose from somewhere beneath the surface, a groan that seemed to vibrate through the concrete beneath their feet rather than travel through the air. Issei grabbed Rias's arm and pulled her back several steps without hesitation, positioning his body between her and the water on pure instinct. We are leaving, he said firmly. Now, for once, Rias did not argue or insist on studying the phenomenon further. She simply nodded, and together they retreated back through the rows of collapsed shelving at a pace just short of running, the low groan behind them fading only once they had passed back through the door they entered by, sealing it firmly behind them with a strength Issei did not know the gauntlet could still provide. Back in the room lined with identical doors, both of them stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath, hearts pounding from adrenaline rather than exertion. Well, Issei finally said, I am adding that room to the list of places we are never going back to. A wise addition, Rias agreed, pressing a hand briefly against her chest as though steadying her own heartbeat. We should try a different door. Somewhere further from the water level. They moved further down the row, and this time Issei took the lead in choosing, less out of confidence, and more out of a desire to feel some measure of control over a situation that otherwise left him powerless. He selected a door near the very end of the row, one that, for no reason he could articulate, felt slightly warmer to the touch than the others. When he pushed it open, warm, dim light spilled out instead of the harsh fluorescent buzz that had followed them since they arrived, and both of them paused on the threshold, staring into a room that looked, against all reasonable expectation, almost comfortable. The space beyond was small, walled in soft wood paneling instead of yellow paper, furnished with a low couch, a single reading lamp casting warm amber light across worn floorboards, and strangest of all, a small unlit fireplace set into the far wall, as though someone had once intended this room to be lived in rather than merely passed through. This does not fit, Rias said slowly, though she did not move to close the door. Everything else in this place has been hostile, or at best, indifferent. This looks deliberate. Comforting, even. Maybe that is exactly why we should be careful, Issei said, though he found himself unable to look away from the small, warm room, so different from the cold horror of the water level they had just fled. Things that look too good to be true usually are. Agreed, Rias said. And yet we have been walking for hours with no food, no water, and a monster groaning at us from a lake with no reflection, Issei finished for her. I know. Me too. They exchanged a long look, both clearly weighing caution against sheer exhaustion, until Rias finally sighed and stepped over the threshold, her guard still raised but her shoulders sagging with obvious relief the moment the warmth of the room touched her skin. We rest here, she decided. Briefly. And carefully. If anything about this room changes, anything at all, we leave immediately, no hesitation. Deal, Issei said, following her inside and easing the door shut behind them, though he made certain, quietly, to keep track of exactly where it stood in relation to the small couch, just in case they needed to move fast. Chapter 3. The warmth of the small room settled over them slowly, and for the first time since waking on that damp yellow carpet, Issei allowed himself to sit rather than stand ready for a threat. He lowered himself onto the edge of the worn couch, close enough to the door to reach it in a heartbeat, and watched as Rias did the same, sitting a careful distance away from him, her eyes still scanning every corner of the small room out of long habit. Do you think this place is testing us? Issei asked after a while, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. First the yellow halls, then the water, and now this. It almost feels like something wanted us tired and scared before giving us somewhere soft to land. It is possible, Rias said, tucking a strand of red hair behind her ear. Or it is possible that a place with no rules simply contains contradictions, comfort and horror both, without any deliberate intention behind either one. I do not think we can assume malice or kindness from a space like this. Only unpredictability. Unpredictability I can handle, Issei said. It is the not knowing if Drake is okay that is getting to me. As if summoned by the mention of his name, A faint warmth stirred somewhere deep inside Issei's chest, small and distant, like an ember refusing to go out even under a smothering blanket. He sat up straighter, focusing inward, and after a long moment, a voice finally answered him, though it was quieter and more strained than he had ever heard it. "Partner," Drake's voice rumbled, faint but unmistakably present, "I am here. This place muffles my voice the way thick stone muffles sound. I have been trying to reach you since we arrived, but only now, in this quieter room, has enough of my strength returned to manage it." "Drake," Issei said aloud, relief flooding through him so strongly that Rias sat up straighter beside him, alert and hopeful. "You are okay. What is this place? Do you know anything about it?" "I know enough to be wary," Drake said. "I have felt spaces like this before, long ago, though never quite like this one. They exist outside the natural order of things, stitched together from forgotten corners of countless worlds. Power does not flow properly here because this place was never meant to hold power at all. It resists us the way a body resists an infection. So we are the infection," Issei said dryly. "An apt comparison," Drake said, something almost like amusement in his weary tone. "Do not expect your gauntlet to perform at full strength here, partner. What little power you can draw will come slowly, and cost you more than usual. Save it for true necessity." "Understood," Issei said, glancing at Rias, who listened intently despite not being able to hear the dragon's voice directly. He quickly relayed what Drake had said, watching her expression sharpen with focus as she processed the information. "That aligns with what I suspected," she said. "If this place resists power deliberately, then perhaps it also resists intention. Perhaps that is why the comfortable room and the horrifying one exist side by side. It does not choose kindness or cruelty. It simply reflects whatever exists at its edges, borrowed from countless other places without judgment. That is either really comforting or really terrifying," Issei said. "I genuinely cannot decide which." "Both, likely," Rias said, a tired smile touching her lips. "Most true things usually are." They sat together in silence for a while after that, the warm lamp casting long, gentle shadows across the wood-paneled walls, and for the first time, Issei found himself studying Rias not as his king, not as the woman he had sworn to protect at any cost, but simply as a person, exhausted and frightened and doing her best to hold everything together for both of their sakes. "Bucho," he said quietly. "Yes? Thank you for staying calm. I know it is your job, sort of, to keep it together for the peerage, but I do not think I could have made it this far without you steady beside me." Rias turned to look at him fully, something soft and unguarded crossing her expression in the warm light. "You give yourself too little credit, Issei. You have protected me at every turn since we arrived here, without hesitation, without complaint, even when your own power failed you. That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with dragons or gauntlets." Issei felt heat rise in his face, though this time it had nothing to do with fear. "I just do not know what I would do if something happened to you," he admitted quietly. "That is not really courage. That is just, I do not know, the only thing that makes sense to me." For a long moment, neither of them said anything, the warm silence between them filled with something neither was quite ready to name, though both clearly felt it settle a little deeper into place. Finally, Rias reached over and rested her hand gently over his, her fingers cool against the warmth of his skin. "We will find a way out of here," she said, quiet but certain. "Together, exactly as you promised. And when we do, I intend to make sure my peerage knows precisely how much they owe you for keeping me safe." "You do not have to do that," Issei said, though something in his chest warmed at the thought regardless. "I know I do not have to," Rias said. "I want to." They sat like that for a while longer, her hand still resting over his, until exhaustion finally began to catch up with both of them, the adrenaline of the day draining away and leaving only bone-deep tiredness in its wake. Rias was the one who eventually broke the silence, her voice softer now, edged with obvious fatigue. "We should rest while we can," she said. "Truly rest, even if only for a short while. We will need our strength for whatever comes next, and this room, whatever its purpose, seems to be the safest place we have found so far." "Yeah," Issei agreed, stifling a yawn he had been holding back for what felt like hours. "I will take first watch." You should sleep first, Bucho. You have been pushing yourself since we got here. And you have not? She countered, though there was no real argument in her tone, only fond exasperation. I will manage, he said. Please. Let me do this one thing for you. Rias studied him for a long moment, then finally relented with a small nod, shifting to lean back against the arm of the couch, careful to keep a respectful distance even as exhaustion pulled at her. Wake me if anything changes. Anything at all. I promise, Issei said, settling into position near the door where he could watch both the entrance and Rias at once. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into the slow rhythm of true sleep, and Issei allowed himself a small, tired smile at the sight of her finally at rest, even if only for a little while, even in a place with no name, and no rules and no promise of an easy way home. He kept his eyes on the door, on the warm lamp, on the woman sleeping peacefully beside him, and settled in to keep his promise for as long as it took. Outside the small room, beyond the door he watched so carefully, the endless yellow halls stretched on in their humming, buzzing silence, patient and unchanging, waiting to see what the two of them would do when morning came, if morning could even be said to exist in a place built from the forgotten edges of countless worlds. Issei did not know how long they would be trapped here, or what other rooms, other horrors, other strange comforts waited beyond the doors they had not yet opened. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep and steady in his chest, that whatever came next, he would face it standing between Rias and the dark, exactly as he had promised, for as long as it took to find their way home. Chapter 4. Time moved strangely in the small warm room, without windows or clocks to mark its passing, and Issei found himself measuring the hours instead by the slow rise and fall of Rias's breathing beside him. He sat with his back against the wall near the door, the gauntlet resting quietly on his forearm, its jeweled eye dim but steady, and let his mind wander through everything Drake had told him while he waited for the dragon to speak again. Partner, Drake finally rumbled, his voice a low murmur meant for Issei alone, you should know that a place like this does not remain static for long. It shifts. Rooms rearrange themselves according to rules I cannot fully perceive from within you. Do not assume that the path you walk to reach this room will still exist when you try to leave it. That is not exactly reassuring, Issei murmured back, careful not to wake Rias. I did not say it to reassure you, Drake said. I said it so you would stay alert. There is something else, partner. While you slept earlier, and while she sleeps now, I have felt something circling. Not close enough to see, not close enough to threaten, but present. Watching, perhaps. Waiting. Issei's grip on the doorframe tightened, and he cast a slow glance around the small, warm room, searching every shadow the amber lamp failed to reach. Nothing moved. The fireplace remained cold and empty, the wood-paneled walls unchanged, and yet a prickling unease crawled up the back of his neck, the same instinct that had once warned him, correctly, of an ambush during a raiding game long before his eyes had caught any sign of the enemy. Should I wake her? He asked quietly. Not yet, Drake said. Let her rest while she can. But keep your guard raised, and do not let your attention wander far from that door. Issei nodded to himself and settled deeper into position, eyes fixed on the wood-paneled entrance, ears straining for any sound beyond the low crackle of silence that filled the room. Minutes passed, slow and heavy, until finally, faint but unmistakable, he heard it. A soft scrape against the other side of the door, low to the ground, followed by a pause, and then another scrape, closer this time, as though something were testing the frame the way a curious animal might test an unfamiliar object. He rose slowly, careful not to make a sound, and moved to stand directly between the door and Rias, gauntlet raised, jeweled eye glowing faintly brighter as it drew on whatever thin trickle of power the room allowed him. The scraping stopped. Silence stretched, heavy and expectant, and just when Issei allowed himself to hope it had moved on, the door handle turned, slowly, deliberately, though he had made certain to lock it hours before. Bucho, he said, voice low but urgent. Wake up. Now. Rias came awake instantly, the disciplined reflex of a devil raised for war overriding any lingering grogginess, and she was on her feet beside him within a heartbeat, eyes locked on the slowly turning handle. What is it? Something is trying to get in, Issei said. Drake warned me a few minutes ago that something has been circling. The handle stopped turning. For a long, unbearable moment, nothing happened at all, and then, without warning, the entire door shuddered under a heavy impact from the other side, the wood groaning under a weight that felt far larger than anything that could have fit through the narrow gap beneath it. Rias raised her hand on instinct, summoning what weak flicker of destruction magic she could manage, while Issei stepped fully in front of her, gauntlet braced against the door. The window, Rias said suddenly, nodding toward a small, round pane of glass set high in the far wall that neither of them had noticed before, half hidden behind a warped wooden beam. This room did not have a window when we entered. Great, Issei said through gritted teeth as the door shuttered again, cracks beginning to spider across its surface. So it really is rearranging itself. Perfect timing. Issei, listen to me, Rias said quickly, her voice sharpening into the commanding tone she used only in true emergencies. Whatever this place is, it seems to respond to intention and to fear. Do not let it see us panic. Focus on getting us out, not on what might be behind that door. Easier said than done, Issei muttered, but he forced his breathing to steady anyway, drawing on the same discipline that had carried him through countless battles where fear had threatened to overwhelm him before. He glanced toward the newly formed window, judged the distance, and made a decision. When I say go, we move for the window. I will boost first, clear a path if I need to, and you follow right behind me. No hesitation. Understood, Rias said, already positioning herself to move. The door finally gave way with a splintering crack, and something vast and indistinct pressed into the opening, a shifting mass of shadow that seemed to absorb the warm lamplight rather than reflect it, limbs too long and too many folding awkwardly to fit through a doorway never meant to contain something of its size. Issei did not wait to see more. Go! He shouted, and together they bolted for the window, Issei slamming his gauntlet against the warped wooden beam with every scrap of strength the suppressed power allowed him, cracking it wide enough for both of them to scramble through in a tangle of limbs and torn fabric, tumbling out into a corridor beyond that, mercifully, bore no resemblance to the horror they had just fled. They hit the floor hard, rolling apart before scrambling back to their feet, and Issei immediately turned to place himself between Rias and the shattered window they had just escaped through. But no shadow followed. No shrieking limb reached through the gap. The warm little room, and whatever had broken into it, seemed to simply cease to exist the moment they left it behind, the corridor beyond showing only the same endless yellow walls and humming lights that had greeted them since the very beginning. For a long moment neither of them spoke, both still catching their breath, hearts hammering from the sudden violence of their escape. Finally, Rias straightened, brushing dust from her torn sleeve, and looked at Issei with something fierce and grateful burning behind her violet eyes. You did well, she said, voice still slightly unsteady. Thank you. We are not out of this yet, Issei said, scanning the corridor in both directions, gauntlet still raised protectively. But we are alive, and we are together. That is still the plan, right? Together, no matter what? Together, Rias confirmed, stepping close enough that her shoulder brushed his. Whatever comes next. They stood there a moment longer, side by side in the buzzing yellow silence, before finally choosing a direction and walking on, leaving the ruined little room and its shifting horror somewhere behind them in a maze that showed no sign of ever coming to an end. Yet for all the fear still coiled tight in his chest, Issei found a strange, steady calm settling over him as well, born from the simple fact that whatever waited ahead, he would not be facing it alone. Chapter 5. The corridor they had chosen after fleeing the ruined little room stretched on longer than any they had walked before, the same yellow walls and humming lights repeating in a pattern that made time itself feel unreliable. Issei kept close to Rias, one hand never straying far from her shoulder, his gauntlet dimmed to a low, steady glow that he had learned to conserve rather than waste on nervous flickers of light. Do you feel that? Rias asked suddenly, slowing her pace. Issei paused, focusing past the low buzz of the fluorescent tubes overhead, and noticed it too. A faint vibration in the floor, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing up through the damp carpet and into the soles of his shoes. Yeah. Feels like something breathing under the floor. Or something structural, Rias offered, though she did not sound entirely convinced by her own suggestion. This place has shown us storage levels and water levels already. Perhaps this is simply another layer beneath us, doing whatever it does. I would rather not find out what that is, Issei said, though he kept walking anyway, since standing still in a corridor that pulsed beneath their feet felt like an even worse option. They continued for what felt like another hour before the corridor finally opened into a wide chamber unlike anything they had encountered so far. Instead of bare walls, this room was covered floor to ceiling in handwriting, thousands of lines scratched, scrawled, and carved into the yellowed paper in a dizzying array of hands, some careful and neat, others jagged and frantic, layered over each other so many times that entire sections had become an illegible tangle of ink and scored paper. This is new, Issei breathed, stepping closer to the nearest wall, careful not to touch it. Bucho, look at this. Someone else has been here. A lot of someone's. Rias moved beside him, her violet eyes scanning the chaotic mass of writing with the same focused intensity she brought to deciphering enemy strategies. Not just been here. Left something behind. Warnings, perhaps, or records. Let us see if any of it is still readable. They searched the wall carefully, and slowly, patient fragments began to separate themselves from the noise. Issei found one section, slightly less crowded than the rest, and read aloud, his voice hushed in the enormous, echoing chamber. Do not trust the doors that feel warm. The cold ones are safer, though colder still than they should be. That matches our experience so far, Rias murmured, moving further along the wall. Here, listen to this one. The lights count you. Do not let them count twice. What does that even mean? Issei asked, glancing nervously up at the buzzing fluorescent tubes stretching overhead. I do not know, Rias admitted. But if enough people wrote it down, in enough different handwriting, it likely means something important. We should be cautious about lingering beneath any single light for too long. They continued reading, piecing together fragments left behind by countless others who had apparently walked these same halls before them, though none of the writing offered any names, any dates, any indication of who these people had been or whether any of them had ever found their way home. Some fragments spoke of creatures with too many joints that moved wrong in the dark. Others spoke of rooms that repeated themselves no matter which direction a person walked, trapping travelers in loops that could last for what felt like years. A few, near the very bottom of one wall, in handwriting far shakier than the rest, simply read, over and over in the same desperate scrawl, the words home, home, home. Issei felt a chill settle over him that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Bucho, how many people do you think have been stuck here? Before us, I mean. Rias was quiet for a long moment, her expression carefully composed despite what he could tell was genuine unease underneath. I do not know. More than I would like to imagine. But Issei, look here. She pointed to a section near the ceiling, written in careful, deliberate script very different from the frantic scrawl surrounding it. This one is different. Read it. Issei tilted his head back and read the careful lines aloud. There is a way out. It is not a door. It is a feeling. The ones who leave stop searching for an exit and start searching for each other instead. I do not know why. I only know it worked for me, once, a long time ago, and I pray it works for whoever reads this next. Neither of them spoke for a long moment after that, the words settling heavily between them in the quiet, humming chamber. That could mean anything, Issei finally said, though his voice carried more hope than doubt. Or it could mean exactly what it sounds like. We have been searching for each other since the moment we arrived, Rias said slowly, as though testing the thought aloud for the first time. Perhaps that is precisely why we have survived this long, when so many others apparently did not. Perhaps the key is not finding a door at all. Or maybe it is a coincidence, and some stranger just wrote something poetic before something with too many joints got them, Issei said, though he offered the grim joke only to keep his own fear at bay rather than because he believed it. Perhaps, Rias allowed. But given everything we have seen so far, I would rather trust in each other than trust in doors that may or may not lead anywhere useful. Issei looked at her for a long moment, struck again by how steady she remained even here, even now, surrounded by the desperate final words of countless strangers who had not been so fortunate. Together, then, he said quietly. Same as always. Together, Rias agreed, and reached for his hand without hesitation this time, lacing her fingers through his in a gesture that felt entirely natural despite everything strange and frightening around them. Now let us find a way out of this room. I do not like how closely those walls seem to be listening. Chapter 6. They left the chamber of writing behind, choosing a narrow passage at its far end that sloped gently upward, a small mercy after so much featureless, flat corridor. Issei kept Rias's hand firmly in his, and neither of them mentioned it, though both seemed unwilling to let go now that the contact had been made. The air feels different here, Rias observed after a while, slowing her pace. Warmer. Almost humid. Issei noticed it too, a faint dampness clinging to the air that reminded him of greenhouses he had visited on school trips years ago, thick with the smell of growing things rather than the dry mildew scent that had followed them since they first arrived. The passage widened gradually, the yellow wallpaper giving way to rough stone, and finally opened into a vast cavern lit not by buzzing fluorescent tubes but by clusters of faintly glowing fungus growing along the ceiling in soft, pulsing blue light. Now that is a change of pace, Issei said, staring up at the strange, gentle glow. Almost pretty, actually. Do not let beauty fool you here, Rias reminded him, though her own eyes lingered on the glowing ceiling with something close to wonder despite her caution. Everything in this place has shown two faces so far. They moved carefully into the cavern, and Issei's gauntlet, to his surprise, pulsed with a slightly stronger glow than it had managed since their arrival, the jeweled eye brightening as though drawing strength from whatever ambient energy filled this particular space. Drake? He murmured. You feeling that too? I am, the dragon rumbled, his voice noticeably clearer than before. This place carries a different nature than the halls above. Older, perhaps, or simply less hostile to what we are. Use this moment to recover what strength you can, partner. It may not last. Issei relayed the information to Rias, who nodded and closed her eyes briefly, testing her own reserves. A small orb of destruction magic gathered in her palm, steadier this time, holding its shape for several seconds before finally dissipating. Better, she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. Not full strength, but better. We should rest here if we can, and recover as much as possible before continuing. They found a relatively flat outcropping of stone near the cavern wall and settled onto it, the soft blue glow overhead casting gentle shifting patterns across the rocky surface. For a while, either of them spoke, content simply to sit close together and breathe air that did not smell of mildew and old carpet. Can I ask you something? Issei said eventually, breaking the comfortable quiet. Of course, Rias said, turning to look at him. Before all this happened, back at the club room. What were you writing in that notebook? You never got to finish, but I remember you looked really focused on it. Rias was quiet for a moment, a faint, almost embarrassed smile touching her lips. I was recording observations about the strange magic circle, as I always do. But if I am honest, part of what I intended to write concerned something else entirely. Something I had been meaning to say to you for a while, and had not yet found the right moment to bring up properly. Issei's heart skipped, though he tried to keep his voice casual. Oh yeah? What kind of something? Rias hesitated, glancing down at their still joined hands before meeting his eyes again. Her usual composure softened into something far more vulnerable than he was used to seeing from her. I have come to rely on you a great deal, Issei. Not simply as a member of my peerage, and not simply as the Hyoudou, though both of those things matter to me as well. I have come to rely on you as someone I trust completely, someone whose presence makes even the most frightening situations feel survivable. I do not say such things easily, but I think, given where we currently find ourselves, it would be foolish of me to continue holding them back out of habit or caution. Issei stared at her, momentarily forgetting the strange glowing cavern around them entirely, his focus narrowing entirely to the woman beside him and the quiet honesty in her voice. Bucho, I feel the exact same way. I have felt that way for a long time, honestly. I just never really knew how to say it without sounding stupid, or without messing up something that already felt important the way it was. A soft laugh escaped her, warm and genuine despite the exhaustion clearly weighing on her. You could never sound stupid to me, Issei. Not about something like this. They sat together in comfortable silence after that, the glowing fungus pulsing gently overhead, and for a little while, The endless yellow halls and the desperate scrawled warnings of strangers who had come before them felt distant, almost unimportant, set against the quiet warmth passing between them. It was Rias who eventually broke the silence again, her tone shifting back toward practical focus, though she made no move to release his hand. "We should continue on soon," she said. "But I wanted you to know that, regardless of what happens next, regardless of how long this place tries to keep us, I am glad it is you beside me and no one else." "Same here," Issei said quietly. "Every time, Bucho." No contest. They rested a while longer, gathering what strength the strange glowing cavern allowed them, before finally rising and continuing deeper into the cave system, hands still joined, the soft blue light guiding their way through a passage that, for once, did not feel entirely hostile to their presence. Chapter 7. The glowing cavern eventually narrowed into a tunnel that curved sharply downward, the soft blue fungus growing sparser the deeper they descended until, finally, it vanished altogether, leaving them once again in near total darkness broken only by the faint light of Issei's gauntlet. The air grew cooler, then cold, and the rough stone beneath their feet gave way gradually to something smoother, more deliberate, as though carved rather than naturally formed. "This feels different," Rias said quietly, her voice echoing strangely off walls that Issei could not see clearly even with the gauntlet's dim glow. "Older. More intentional. Drake, you getting anything?" Issei murmured. "Caution, partner," the dragon said, his voice tight with an alertness Issei had not heard from him since their arrival. "Something ahead carries a weight I recognize, though I cannot yet name it." "Move slowly." Issei relayed the warning, and together they crept forward, every sense straining against the oppressive darkness, until the tunnel finally opened into a chamber vast enough that even the gauntlet's light could not reach its ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood a single door, ordinary in every way except for the fact that it stood entirely alone, framed by nothing, connected to no wall, simply present in the middle of the open space like a piece of furniture left behind by movers who had forgotten to take it with them. "That is not right," Issei said slowly, staring at the freestanding door. "No," Rias agreed, studying it with obvious wariness. "It is not. And yet it is the first thing we have found that does not resemble every other door in this place. Look at the handle." Issei looked closer and saw what she meant. Unlike the plain, identical handles on every door they had encountered so far, this one was ornate, wrought in the shape of a coiling dragon, its tail wrapping around the base of the handle in a design that felt almost deliberately familiar. "That looks like it was made for me," he said, unease creeping into his voice. "Or made to lure you," Rias countered sharply. "Issei, think carefully before you decide anything. A place like this, that shows two faces in everything, would have every reason to disguise a trap as an invitation." "I know," Issei said, though his eyes remained fixed on the dragon-shaped handle. "But Drake, does it feel like a trap to you? You said you recognized the weight of whatever is here." There was a long pause before Drake finally answered, his voice carefully measured. "I recognize it because it feels similar to my own presence within you, partner. Not identical, but similar, as though something related to dragons, or perhaps to sacred artifacts in general, resides on the other side of that door. Whether that presence is friend or foe, I cannot say with certainty." Issei relayed this to Rias, who frowned deeply, clearly weighing the risk. "That is either extremely promising or extremely dangerous," she said. "And I do not like that we cannot know which before opening it. We have not exactly had the luxury of only doing safe things since we got here," Issei pointed out gently. "But I will not open it if you tell me not to, Bucho. This is your call as much as mine." Rias studied the door a moment longer, then squared her shoulders in the way she always did before committing to a difficult decision. "We open it together, weapons ready, and if anything about what lies beyond feels wrong, we retreat immediately, no arguments." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Issei said, stepping up beside her, gauntlet raised. He reached out and closed his hand around the dragon-shaped handle, finding it warm to the touch in a way that felt oddly comforting rather than threatening, and turned it slowly. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing not another yellow hallway, not a horror waiting to lunge at them, but a small, quiet library, its shelves lined with old leather-bound books, a single reading chair positioned beside a softly burning lamp, and resting on a pedestal in the center of the room, a single scale, large and crimson, unmistakably draconic in origin. That is a dragon scale, Issei breathed, staring at it. A real one. Do not touch it yet, Rias warned, though she stepped forward cautiously alongside him, scanning the quiet library for any sign of hidden threat. This entire room feels deliberate in a way nothing else here has. I do not believe this space exists by accident. Partner, Drake said slowly, his voice carrying an emotion Issei had rarely heard from him before, something close to reverence. That scale. I know it. It belonged to an old friend of mine, long since passed from the world, one of the few dragons I ever considered worth respecting. If a piece of him still exists here, in a place built from forgotten fragments of countless worlds, then perhaps this chamber holds more answers than we realized. Issei approached the pedestal slowly, Rias close beside him, and studied the crimson scale glinting softly in the lamplight. Larger than his own hand, its surface etched with faint markings that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves the longer he looked at them. What do we do with it? He asked quietly. I believe, Drake said, that you should pick it up, partner. Carefully. And listen closely to whatever it has to tell you. Issei glanced at Rias, who gave a small, encouraging nod despite the caution still evident in her posture, and reached out to lift the scale from its pedestal, the weight of it far heavier than its size suggested, warm against his palm like something still faintly alive. Chapter 8. The moment Issei's fingers closed around the scale, the quiet library seemed to hold its breath, the lamp flickering once before steadying into a brighter, warmer glow than before. A voice, ancient and rough, echoed not aloud but directly into his mind, distinct from Drake's familiar rumble, carrying the weight of centuries behind every word. Another bearer of the boosted gear, the voice said, slow and measured. It has been a very long time since anyone has found their way to this chamber. Tell me, young one, do you still walk beside someone worth protecting? Issei glanced instinctively at Rias, standing close beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she watched the scale with cautious curiosity. Yeah, he said aloud, his voice steady despite the strangeness of speaking to a disembodied presence. I do. Her name is Rias, and I am not leaving her side no matter what happens. Good, the voice said, something like approval coloring the single word. That conviction is precisely what this place tests, whether it intends to or not. Many who wander these halls lose themselves searching only for an exit, forgetting the people who matter more than any door ever could. Those are the ones who remain trapped the longest, if they escape at all. Are you saying we are already close to finding a way out? Rias asked, addressing the scale directly, though her eyes flicked briefly to Issei as though seeking confirmation that speaking to it was indeed the right approach. Closer than most, the voice answered. Though closeness in a place without true distance means little on its own. I can offer you guidance, but not certainty. This space responds to conviction, to bonds forged and tested under pressure. The stronger the bond between those who walk it together, the more the space itself begins to bend, however slightly, toward mercy. How do we make it bend further? Issei asked. By continuing exactly as you have, the voice said. Protecting one another without hesitation. Choosing honesty over fear when it would be easier to hide behind silence. And when the moment comes, and it will come, when this place offers you a choice between something you desire and something you know to be right, choose correctly. That choice, more than any door or hallway, will determine whether you find your way home. The lamp flickered again, and the voice grew fainter, as though whatever remained of the ancient dragon within the scale was retreating back into whatever quiet rest it had known before their arrival. Take the scale with you, it said, barely more than a whisper now. It will not grant you power, not directly, but it may grant you clarity when clarity is hardest to find. Go now, before this chamber closes behind you as all such chambers eventually do. The moment the words faded entirely, the warm library light began to dim, the shelves of leather-bound books blurring at their edges as though losing solidity, and Issei felt Rias's grip on his arm tighten with sudden urgency. We need to leave, now, she said, already pulling him toward the door they had entered through. They moved quickly, Issei tucking the scale carefully into the inner pocket of his jacket as they crossed back through the doorway, and the instant both of them cleared the threshold, the freestanding door slammed shut behind them with a sound like a great exhale, the quiet library beyond it gone, leaving only the vast, dark chamber they had first descended into, the door itself dissolving into shadow until no trace of it remained. For a long moment, they simply stood there, catching their breath in the darkness, the faint glow of Issei's gauntlet the only light between them. Did that actually just happen? Issei asked, half convinced he had imagined the entire encounter. It happened, Rias confirmed, though wonder colored her voice more than doubt. And I believe it happened for a reason. That voice spoke as though it understood exactly what kind of place this is, and exactly what it takes to escape it. Choosing right over easy, Issei said slowly, turning the ancient words over in his mind. Protecting each other no matter what. I mean, that is basically what we have been doing this whole time. Then perhaps we are further along than we realized, Rias said, a cautious hope entering her tone for the first time since they had fallen into this place. Or perhaps the truly difficult choice the voice mentioned still waits ahead of us, and we would be wise not to grow complacent simply because we have survived this far. Fair point, Issei admitted. Guess we keep moving then. Together, like always. Together, Rias agreed, reaching for his hand once more as they turned to face the darkness stretching ahead of them, the memory of the ancient dragon's warning settling quietly into both their thoughts as they pressed onward, searching not merely for an exit now, but for whatever test still lay waiting somewhere in the endless, shifting dark. Chapter 9. They walked for a long while after leaving the dark chamber behind, the passage gradually widening until the rough stone gave way once more to the familiar yellow wallpaper and buzzing lights that had greeted them at the very beginning of their ordeal. Issei found the return to that oppressive sameness almost worse than the darkness they had just left, as though the place itself were reminding them how far they still had to go. Do you think that scale is doing anything right now? He asked, one hand pressed briefly against the pocket where it rested, still faintly warm through the fabric of his jacket. I do not know, Rias admitted. But I trust that voice meant what it said. Clarity, when clarity is hardest to find. Perhaps we will not understand its purpose until the moment we need it most. They continued on, and the corridor eventually split into two identical branches, one leading left, one leading right, both stretching away into the same featureless haze. Issei stopped at the fork, glancing between them, and felt an odd, prickling unease settle over him that had nothing to do with any sound or sight. Something is off about this, he murmured. Rias studied both branches carefully, her earlier caution sharpening into full alertness. I feel it too. Neither path looks different from the other, and yet something about this choice feels heavier than it should. As if summoned by her words, a soft voice drifted from the left branch, faint but unmistakably familiar, calling Issei's name in a tone that struck him with sudden, aching recognition. Issei, the voice called, warm and worried, achingly like his own mother's voice from 1,000 ordinary mornings back home. Issei, sweetheart, where are you? Please come find me, I am so frightened. Issei's chest tightened painfully, every instinct screaming at him to run toward that voice, to find her, to make sure she was safe, and he took an unconscious step toward the left passage before Rias's hand tightened around his, holding him in place. Issei, she said quietly, urgently. Look at me. Your mother is not here. She could not possibly be here. But that is her voice, Issei said, his own voice cracking slightly under the strain of hearing something so precisely, impossibly familiar. Bucho, that is exactly how she sounds when she is scared. I know, Rias said gently, though her grip on his hand did not loosen. And that is precisely why we cannot trust it. Remember the writing on the wall. Remember what the voice in the library told us. This place shows us what we most want to see, or what will most effectively pull us apart. This is the choice it warned us about, Issei. I am certain of it. The voice called again, more desperate this time, and Issei felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of his eyes, the pull of it almost unbearable even as some deeper, steadier part of him recognized the truth in what Rias was saying. He forced himself to breathe, to think past the ache in his chest, and finally, slowly, nodded. You are right, he said, voice rough. It has to be a trick. My mom would never actually be here. I know that. It just does not make it any easier to hear. I know, Rias said softly, stepping closer, her free hand coming up to rest gently against his cheek, grounding him in a way that finally allowed the pull of the false voice to loosen its grip. You are allowed to feel that ache, Issei. It does not make you weak. It makes you someone capable of loving people enough that even a false imitation of their voice can undo you for a moment. That is not a flaw. It is precisely why I trust you as completely as I do. Issei let out a shaky breath, some of the tension finally draining from his shoulders, and covered her hand with his own where it rested against his cheek. Thank you, he said quietly, for stopping me. I do not know if I would have caught myself in time. That is why we do not separate, Rias said, echoing the promise they had made at the very beginning of this ordeal. Because this place will use anything it can find to pull us apart, and the only defense against that is refusing to let it succeed, no matter how convincing the lie. The voice from the left passage faded slowly into silence, as though recognizing that its attempt had failed, and after a long moment, Issei nodded toward the right branch instead. Then I guess that settles which way we are going. Agreed, Rias said, though she did not immediately release his hand, and Issei found he did not want her to. Together they turned down the right passage, leaving the echo of a false, aching voice behind them, and pressed onward into another stretch of humming yellow corridor that showed no sign, yet, of the true way home. They had not gone far when the corridor began to change again, the walls losing their yellow tint by slow degrees until they turned a pale, clean white, the buzzing fluorescent lights giving way to soft, even illumination that came from no visible source at all. The carpet beneath their feet vanished entirely, replaced by smooth, cool tile, and the air itself seemed to still, heavy with an expectant quiet that felt entirely different from the oppressive silence they had grown used to. This feels important, Rias said quietly, slowing her steps. Yeah, Issei agreed, gauntlet raised instinctively despite the lack of any obvious threat. Feels like we are supposed to notice it. Ahead of them, the white corridor terminated in a single, plain door, unremarkable in every way except for its placement at the very end of a passage that otherwise offered no branches, no alternatives, nothing but a straight path leading directly to it. Issei felt the dragon scale in his pocket grow warmer against his chest the closer they approached, until, standing directly before the door, it pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat. I think this is it, he said quietly. Whatever the voice in the library meant about a choice. I think it is waiting for us right on the other side of this door. Rias squeezed his hand once, steadying herself as much as him. Then let us face it exactly as we have faced everything else. Together, and without hesitation. Issei nodded, reached for the plain, unremarkable handle, and together they stepped through, unsure of what waited beyond, certain only that whatever it was, they would meet it side by side. Chapter 10. The room beyond the white door was empty, vast and featureless, its walls, floor, and ceiling all the same seamless white as the corridor that had led them there, offering no shadows, no corners, nothing for the eye to catch on except a single object resting at its exact center. A small, plain box, no larger than a jewelry case, sat alone on the white floor, and beside it, impossibly, stood a second door, identical to the one they had just walked through, positioned only a few steps beyond the box. 2 doors and a box, Issei said slowly, scanning the empty room for any hidden threat. That feels like a setup for exactly the kind of choice that voice warned us about. Agreed, Rias said, stepping forward cautiously, her hands still firmly laced with his. Let us see what it wants of us before assuming the worst. As they approached the box, words began to form on its lid, etching themselves into the surface without any visible hand to write them, the same ancient, measured voice from the library speaking directly into both of their minds at once this time, rather than Issei's alone. Within this box rests a single gift, the voice said. Take it, and the door beside it will open immediately, delivering you both safely back to the world you came from, memories of this place fading gently until only a vague unease remains, as though waking from a dream neither of you can quite recall. You will return exactly as you were before you fell, untouched by what you have endured here. Issei felt a surge of hope rise sharply in his chest. That is it! We just take it, and we are home? Wait, Rias said, her grip on his hand tightening. Let it finish. There is always a cost in a place like this. We both know that by now. The voice continued unhurried. Understand what you would be choosing. To forget this place is also to forget what you have learned within it. The words spoken beside the glowing cavern, the honesty shared in the dark, the truth you have only now allowed yourselves to voice aloud to one another, all of it would fade along with the fear and the danger. You would return exactly as you were, in every sense, carrying nothing forward from this journey at all. Issei's excitement faltered, and he glanced at Rias, whose expression had grown carefully still, the same look she wore when weighing a decision that could not be undone. Or, the voice went on, you may leave the box untouched and continue searching for your own way out, through your own effort and your own bond, carrying every memory of this place with you when you finally do find your way home, assuming you find it at all. That path offers no guarantee, no easy promise, only the certainty that whatever you build between yourselves along the way will remain yours, unaltered, when at last you step back into the world you left behind. Silence settled over the white room once the voice fell quiet, and Issei found himself staring at the small, plain box, torn between the desperate desire to simply go home and the sudden, sharp fear of losing everything that had passed between himself and Rias since the moment they had fallen into this place. Butcho, he said slowly, if we take it, would we forget what we said back in the cavern? Would we forget all of this? Would we forget how we feel about each other? I do not know for certain, Rias admitted, her voice quieter than he had heard it in a long while. But I do not intend to risk finding out. Issei looked at her sharply, hope flickering back to life despite himself. You mean you want to keep going? I mean, Rias said, turning to face him fully, her violet eyes steady and certain despite the vulnerability she allowed to show plainly on her face, that whatever this place has cost us in fear and exhaustion, it has also given us honesty we might never have found the courage to share otherwise. I am not willing to trade that away for an easier path home, however tempting the offer. I would rather walk every remaining hallway in this place beside you, remembering everything, than wake up safe and comfortable having forgotten what you mean to me. Issei felt something warm and fierce settle into his chest, chasing away the last of his hesitation entirely. Then we leave the box alone, he said firmly. We find our own way out. Together, exactly like we promised. Together, Rias agreed, and together they stepped back from the small, plain box without touching it, watching as the second door beside it simply dissolved into the seamless white wall, denying them the easy escape it had offered, leaving only the door they had entered through still standing solid behind them. The moment the false door vanished, the ancient voice returned one final time, softer now, almost gentle. Well chosen. Few who reach this room choose as you have. Perhaps that is why so few of them ever truly find their way home, even when the door stands willing to open for them. Continue on, both of you. I believe you are closer than you know. The white room began to dim, the seamless walls fading gradually back into the familiar yellow wallpaper and humming fluorescent lights that had followed them since the very beginning, and Issei realized, as the transformation completed itself around them, that the small box and its impossible choice had vanished entirely, leaving no trace behind except the memory of the decision they had made together. Do you think we made the right call? Issei asked quietly, once the ordinary hum of the lights had settled fully back into place. I know we did, Rias said, and this time, when she looked at him, there was no hesitation left in her expression at all, only a warmth that had nothing to do with fear or exhaustion and everything to do with the quiet certainty that had grown steadily between them since the moment they first fell into this endless, shifting place. Whatever waits ahead of us, Issei, I would rather face it remembering everything than forget it, and call myself safe. Issei squeezed her hand and looked ahead down the familiar, humming corridor stretching once more into the yellow haze, and found, despite everything, that he was smiling. Then let us go find that door for real this time, he said, and together they walked on, deeper into the maze that had tested them and, so far, had not managed to break them apart. Chapter 11. The corridor beyond the white room settled back into its familiar rhythm of yellow wallpaper and humming lights. But something had changed in the quality of the silence around them, a subtle shift Issei could not quite name until Rias voiced it first. It feels lighter, she said, glancing around as they walked. As though the air itself weighs less than it did before. Maybe that thing was telling the truth, Issei said. About us being closer than we know. Or maybe I am just getting used to the smell of old carpet. Rias allowed herself a small laugh, and the sound of it, warm and unguarded, seemed to carry further than it should have in the buzzing quiet, as though the corridor itself welcomed the noise rather than swallowing it the way it had swallowed every sound before. They walked on, hands still joined, and for a while the maze offered them nothing more threatening than long stretches of empty hallway, and the occasional closed door that neither of them felt any pull to open. It was Issei who noticed the mirror first, set into an alcove that had not been there a moment before they turned a corner, tall and ornate in a way that clashed sharply with the plain walls surrounding it, its frame carved with looping patterns that reminded him faintly of the dragon-shaped handle from the library door. Another gift, or another trap, Rias murmured, studying it warily. This place does enjoy repeating its tricks with slight variation. Issei stepped closer, and his own reflection looked back at him, ordinary in every way, until it did not. The reflection's expression shifted, growing distant and hollow, and behind it, faintly, Issei saw an image of himself standing alone in the yellow halls, no Rias beside him, his gauntlet dark and lifeless on his arm, his face carved with an exhaustion that looked less like tiredness and more like surrender. "That is not real," he said aloud, though the sight of it settled uneasily in his stomach anyway. "What do you see?" Rias asked, stepping up beside him, and her own reflection shifted the moment she appeared, showing her standing regal and untouched in the throne room of the Gremory estate, surrounded by her family, safe and celebrated, with no trace of Issei or this maze anywhere in the reflected world behind her. "I see you happy," Issei said quietly, throat tightening. "Home. Safe. Without any of this. And I see you alone," Rias said, just as quietly, convinced that leaving me behind would somehow be easier than what we are doing now. They looked at each other, both shaken by what the glass had chosen to show them, and Issei felt a flare of something fierce and protective rise up against the quiet suggestion the mirror seemed to be making. "It is trying to convince us that separating would be better for the other person," he said slowly, understanding dawning. "That you would be happier without dragging me through this, and I would be happier if I stopped worrying about protecting you. Which is, of course, absurd," Rias said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly with the effort of shaking off the image still lingering behind the glass. "I have never once felt burdened by your presence here, Issei. If anything, you are the only reason I have not lost myself to fear entirely." "Same here," Issei said, forcing his eyes away from the hollow reflection of himself and back to the real woman standing beside him. "I would rather be scared here with you than safe anywhere else without you." The mirror's surface rippled once, the false images dissolving into ordinary reflected glass showing only the two of them, standing close together, hands joined, faces set with the same stubborn determination that had carried them this far. Then, slowly, the mirror itself began to fade, its ornate frame dissolving into the yellow wallpaper as though it had never been there at all. "I am starting to think this place tests the same lesson over and over," Issei said, watching the last traces of the frame disappear. "Just wearing a different mask each time." "Perhaps that is the nature of it," Rias said. "A single truth, repeated endlessly until it either breaks those who walk through it, or becomes unbreakable in them instead." "Well," Issei said, squeezing her hand, "I vote for unbreakable." "As do I," Rias said, and together they continued on, the corridor ahead beginning, subtly, to slope downward once more, as though the maze itself were drawing them steadily towards something waiting deeper still. Chapter 12. The downward slope steepened gradually until the yellow wallpaper gave way entirely to bare concrete, the buzzing fluorescent tubes growing sparser and dimmer with every step, until finally Issei's gauntlet became their only reliable source of light, casting a narrow green glow across walls that felt closer, tighter, pressing in from both sides in a way that made his shoulders instinctively hunch. "This is not the storage level," Rias said quietly, her voice tight with focus. "Different texture to the concrete. Different air. Drag anything?" Issei murmured. The dragon's voice came low and urgent. "Partner, the presence I warned you of earlier, the one circling before it broke into your resting room, I feel it again. Closer this time. It has been tracking you since that encounter, patient, waiting for a moment when your guard might slip." Issei relayed the warning immediately, and Rias's grip on his hand tightened, her other hand already gathering what destruction magic the suppressed air allowed her, thin and unsteady but present. "Then we do not slip," she said. "We keep moving, and we keep our guard raised until we are clear of this passage." They quickened their pace, the narrow concrete corridor twisting unpredictably, doubling back on itself in ways that made Issei increasingly certain they were being herded rather than simply finding their own path. The soft scraping sound returned first, faint at the very edge of hearing, and then the low, wet groan he remembered all too well from the room with the reflectionless water, echoing this time from directly ahead of them rather than behind. "It is trying to box us in," Rias said grimly, slowing to a stop as the passage split into 3 separate branches, each one identical, each one radiating the same faint wrongness that had haunted every choice they had faced since arriving. "Any of your magic tricks going to help us pick the right one?" Issei asked, gauntlet raised, eyes scanning the darkness beyond each branch for any hint of movement. "I do not have time to gather enough power for a proper reading," Rias admitted, frustration sharp in her voice. "Not with that thing already closing in." The scraping grew louder, closer, and Issei felt the distinct, crawling certainty that whatever hunted them was no longer bothering to hide its approach, confident, perhaps, that it finally had them cornered in a dead end of its own choosing. He thought fast, weighing their options, and made a decision. "Drake," he said aloud, "I need whatever boost you can give me. Even a small one. I am not running from this thing blind into a dead end. I would rather stand and give Bucho a chance to get clear." "You will not be fighting alone, Issei," Rias said sharply, before Drake could even respond. "We agreed. Together. I did not survive this long beside you only to watch you throw yourself at something dangerous while I retreat to safety." "Bucho." "No," she said, cutting him off with a firmness that left no room for argument. "If we fight together, exactly as we have done everything else here. That is not a request, Issei. That is how this ends, one way or another." Issei looked at her for a long moment, torn between the desperate urge to protect her at any cost and the clear, unshakable resolve in her eyes that told him arguing further would accomplish nothing except wasting the little time they had left. "Together, then," he said finally, drawing strength from her certainty even as his own fear roared louder than ever. "Boost, Drake. Whatever you can spare." "Boost," the gauntlet intoned, its voice thinner and more strained than Issei had ever heard it, the familiar surge of doubled power arriving slower and weaker than usual, but arriving nonetheless, a warm rush of strength flooding up his arm and settling into his chest like a held breath finally released. The shadow came around the corner of the middle passage in the same instant, vast and shifting exactly as it had been before, limbs folding and unfolding in configurations that made no sense against the narrow concrete corridor, its presence swallowing what little light remained. Issei stepped forward without hesitation, placing himself squarely between the creature and Rias, gauntlet raised, every ounce of borrowed strength gathered into the fist he drove forward the moment the thing lunged. The impact sent a shudder through the entire corridor, dust and loose concrete raining down from the ceiling, and the shadow recoiled with a shrieking wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, staggering back down the passage it had emerged from. Issei did not let up, pressing forward, and Rias moved with him rather than behind him, her own weakened magic lancing out in short, precise bursts that struck the creature's shifting mass with enough force to keep it reeling. "Now, Issei, the left passage, I can feel it, that is the way through," Rias shouted over the creature's wail, some instinct or fragment of magic finally cutting through the chaos to offer clarity. "Copy that," Issei said, and with one final, boosted strike that sent the shadow crashing backward into the darkness of the middle passage, he grabbed Rias's hand and bolted for the left branch, both of them running full speed as the creature's wail faded slowly behind them, swallowed once more by the oppressive quiet of the maze. Chapter 13. They ran until their legs burned and their lungs ached, the narrow concrete corridor finally widening into a broader tunnel that showed the first hints of natural light Issei had seen since they arrived, pale and gray, filtering down from somewhere far above through what looked like a long, vertical shaft cut into solid rock. "Wait," Rias gasped, slowing to a stop and pressing a hand against the tunnel wall to steady herself. "I need a moment. That took more out of me than I expected." "Take all the time you need," Issei said, positioning himself protectively at the mouth of the tunnel they had just fled through, watching for any sign of pursuit. "You did great back there, by the way. That last red on the passage probably saved us a lot of trouble." "We did great," Rias corrected, catching her breath. "I could not have managed any of that without you standing exactly where you stood." They rested there for several minutes, the pale light from above growing gradually brighter as their eyes adjusted, until Issei could finally make out details of the shaft rising above them, its walls lined with what looked unmistakably like old, weathered stone stairs spiraling upward into the gray light. "That looks like an actual way up," he said, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in what felt like days. "Real stairs. Real light. But Cho, do you think? I think we should be cautious about assuming anything in this place is exactly what it appears to be," Rias said, though even she could not fully mask the hope threading through her own words. "But I also think we have earned the right to at least investigate." They approached the base of the spiraling stairs together, and Issei's gauntlet, still faintly warm from the fight, pulsed once as they drew near, the same gentle heartbeat he had felt from the dragon's scale back in the library. He reached into his jacket, and found the scale glowing faintly through the fabric, warmer now than it had been at any point since he first picked it up. "It is reacting to something," he said, pulling it free and holding it up toward the light spilling down from above. The ancient markings etched across its surface shifted and rearranged themselves the way they had before, settling finally into a pattern that looked, unmistakably, like an arrow pointing upward along the spiral stairs. "I believe that settles the matter," Rias said, a small, tired smile finally breaking through her exhaustion. "Shall we?" They began to climb, the stone steps worn smooth by countless feet that had walked them long before either of them arrived, though whether those feet had ever reached the top, either of them could say for certain. The climb was long, winding upward in slow, patient spirals, the gray light growing steadily warmer and more golden the higher they went, until finally, breathless and aching, they emerged into a wide, open chamber bathed in soft, natural sunlight pouring down from an opening far above that looked, for the first time since their arrival, like an actual sky. "Is that?" Issei started, staring upward, hardly daring to hope. "I do not know," Rias said, equally transfixed. "But it looks real. It feels real." The chamber itself was circular, its walls carved with the same looping dragon patterns that decorated the scale in Issei's hand and the handle of the library door, and at its center stood a raised dais, empty except for a single, unlit torch mounted on a stone pedestal. Issei approached slowly, scale still held tight in his palm, and felt its warmth surge the moment he stepped onto the dais itself. "I think this wants us to light it," he said, glancing back at Rias. "With what?" she asked, though she was already moving to join him, scanning the chamber for any obvious source of flame. Issei looked down at the gauntlet on his arm, then at the scale glowing steadily brighter in his palm, and understanding settled over him slowly, the same way it had back in the library when the ancient voice first spoke to him. "Maybe not fire," he said. "Maybe something else." He held the scale toward the unlit torch and called on what little power remained to him after the fight in the corridor below, a small, focused burst of draconic energy channeled carefully through the gauntlet, and into the ancient relic in his hand. The scale flared brilliant crimson, and the torch ignited instantly, not with ordinary fire, but with a steady, warm light that looked remarkably like sunlight given form, spilling outward to fill the entire chamber with a golden glow that chased every remaining shadow into nothing. Chapter 14. The moment the torch caught, the entire chamber seemed to exhale, the golden light washing over the carved walls and settling into the stone itself, and the ancient voice from the library returned once more, warmer now, closer, as though speaking not from some distant fragment of memory but from somewhere directly within the light surrounding them. "Well done," the voice said. "Very few reach this chamber at all, and fewer still manage to light the flame once they arrive. It requires more than simple strength. It requires a bond strong enough to share power freely between two hearts, without hesitation, without holding anything back." "Is this the way out?" Issei asked, scale still held carefully in his palm, its glow settling into a steady, gentle pulse. "It is the beginning of the way out," the voice corrected gently. "This chamber marks a boundary between the deeper reaches of this place and the world you remember. From here, the path will grow clearer, though I will not pretend it grows easier. What waits at the very end of your journey will test the bond between you more thoroughly than anything you have faced so far." "What kind of test?" Rias asked, her earlier exhaustion sharpening back into focused caution. "That I cannot tell you," the voice admitted. "Every pair who reaches this point faces something different, shaped by what lies deepest and most unresolved between them. I can only offer this counsel. Whatever you face, do not let fear convince you to hide the truth of your feelings from one another, even for a moment. This place preys on hesitation and unspoken doubt more than it preys on any physical danger. The golden light began to soften, the voice fading gradually the way it had before, until only the steady warmth of the torch remained, illuminating the chamber in quiet, patient light. Issei looked down at the scale in his hand, then at Rias standing beside him, her expression thoughtful and a little uncertain despite everything they had already shared. Is there anything you have been holding back? He asked quietly, because if there is, I would rather hear it now than have this place use it against us later. Rias was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an expression he could not quite read, before finally speaking, her voice softer and more vulnerable than he had ever heard it. There is something, she admitted. Something I have wanted to say for a long time, long before any of this happened, but never found the courage to voice properly, always telling myself the timing was wrong, or that saying it aloud might complicate what we already had. Issei's heart pounded, though he kept his voice gentle. You can tell me, Kuoh. Whatever it is. I love you, Rias said simply, the words settling into the golden light between them with a quiet, unshakable certainty. Not merely as a valuable member of my peerage, and not merely out of gratitude for everything you have sacrificed on my behalf. I love you as Issei Hyoudou, exactly as you are, clumsy and brave and endlessly kind in ways you rarely give yourself credit for. I have loved you for longer than I have been willing to admit, even to myself, and I did not want to leave those words unspoken any longer, not here, not with everything we have already faced together. For a long moment, Issei could not find his voice at all, the weight of her words settling over him like the warmth of the torch itself, chasing away every doubt and fear that had followed him since the moment they fell into this place. I love you too, he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion he no longer felt any need to hide. I think I have for a long time, Kuoh. Longer than I probably realized. I just never thought someone like you could ever feel the same way about someone like me. Someone like you, Rias echoed softly, closing the distance between them until barely a breath separated them, is exactly the someone I have wanted all along. She reached up and gently cupped his face, and Issei leaned into her touch without hesitation, the golden light of the chamber wrapping around them both like a quiet blessing. When she finally closed the last small distance between them and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his lips, warm and gentle and entirely without urgency, the torch behind them flared brighter for just a moment, as though the chamber itself approved of the honesty finally spoken aloud within its walls. They parted slowly, foreheads resting together, both of them smiling in a way that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with the quiet joy of finally saying aloud what had lived, unspoken, between them for far too long. Well, Issei said eventually, voice a little unsteady, I guess that is one truth this place will not be able to use against us anymore. No, Rias agreed, laughing softly, the sound bright and warm in the golden chamber. I do not believe it will. They stood together a while longer, simply enjoying the quiet warmth of the torch and the truth they had finally allowed themselves to share, before Rias finally straightened, her expression settling back into the focused determination that had carried them this far. We should continue, she said. The voice warned us that the hardest test still waits ahead. I would rather face it prepared than lose ourselves to this moment for too long, however much I wish we could. Yeah, Issei agreed, taking her hand once more, the scales still glowing softly in his other palm. Let us go find out what this place has left to throw at us. Together they turned toward a narrow archway on the far side of the chamber, one that had not been visible before the torch was lit, and stepped through it side by side, carrying the warmth of the golden light and the truth of their shared confession with them into whatever waited beyond. Chapter 15. The archway opened onto a long, straight corridor unlike any they had walked before, its walls smooth and dark, absorbing the light from Issei's gauntlet almost entirely, leaving only a narrow circle of visibility around them as they advanced. The air here felt heavier, charged with something that made the hair on Issei's arms stand on end, and the scale in his palm had gone from a steady glow to an urgent, rapid pulse. Something is waiting at the end of this, Rias said quietly, her voice tight with focus. I can feel it now too. Powerful. Old, in the same way the presence in the library was old, but far less gentle. The test the voice mentioned, Issei said, gauntlet raised, every sense straining against the oppressive dark pressing in around them. Likely, Rias agreed. Whatever it is, we face it exactly as we have faced everything else. Together, Issei confirmed, and they walked on until the corridor finally opened into a cavernous space, larger than any chamber they had yet encountered, its ceiling lost entirely to darkness far above. At its center, coiled in patient stillness, waited a creature unlike anything Issei had seen, vaguely serpentine in shape but composed of shifting shadow and faint, flickering light, its form constantly reassembling itself as though it could not decide what shape best suited it. Two hearts, bound by choice rather than chance, the creature said, its voice a chorus of overlapping whispers that seemed to come from every direction at once. You have proven your bond in word and in deed, in honesty and in sacrifice. Now you must prove it may withstand true trial, not merely temptation or doubt, but genuine cost. What kind of cost? Rias demanded, stepping forward despite the creature's imposing size, destruction magic gathering, stronger now than it had been at any point since their arrival, as though the confession shared in the golden chamber had loosened whatever restraint this place placed upon her power. One of you may leave this place immediately, whole and unharmed, memory intact, the moment the other agrees to remain behind in their place, the creature said. That is the offer this trial extends. A genuine exit, guaranteed, purchased only by the willing sacrifice of the one left behind. Absolutely not, Issei said instantly, before the creature had even finished speaking, stepping fully in front of Rias with a fierceness that left no room for argument. That is not a choice. That is not even close to a choice. I could say the very same to you, Rias said sharply, moving to stand beside him rather than behind him, refusing entirely to be shielded from a decision that concerned them both equally. We already answered this question once, in the White Room, with the box and the door. We are not answering it differently now simply because the offer has changed its shape. The shadow creature's form rippled, something almost like curiosity threading through its chorus of whispers. Many claim certainty before truly understanding what remaining behind would cost. Are you certain, Dragon-bearer, that you would rather remain trapped here forever than allow her to walk free while you carry the burden alone? I am certain, Issei said, without a flicker of hesitation. But it does not matter, because I am not choosing that either. We leave together, or we do not leave at all. That is the only answer either of us is giving you. And you, Devil Queen, the creature said, turning its attention fully toward Rias. Are you equally certain, knowing what remaining behind in a place such as this might ultimately mean? I have never been more certain of anything, Rias said, voice steady and unwavering. Issei and I do not separate. Not for an easy exit, not for a guaranteed escape, not for any bargain this place chooses to offer. Whatever cost remaining here carries, we will carry it together, exactly as we have carried everything else since the moment we fell into your maze. For a long moment, the creature simply regarded them both, its shifting form growing still, the whispers falling silent entirely, and Issei felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, uncertain whether their answer had passed some hidden test or invited some terrible consequence either of them could anticipate. Then, slowly, the creature began to unwind, its serpentine form dissolving into scattered motes of light that drifted upward into the darkness overhead, and its final words echoed through the vast chamber as it faded entirely from view. Then the trial is complete, it said, voice softening into something almost gentle in its final moments. Few answer so quickly, or so completely, without a single flicker of doubt between them. Go now, both of you, together, exactly as you have chosen. The way home is close, closer than either of you yet realize, and it will open, at last, to a bond that refused every offer to break it apart. Chapter 16. The vast chamber dimmed as the last motes of shadow light vanished into the darkness above, and for a long moment, Issei and Rias simply stood together in the quiet aftermath, hearts still pounding from the weight of the choice they had just refused to make separately. I meant every word, Issei said finally, breaking the silence, his voice a little rough. I would rather be stuck here forever with you than free without you. I know that probably sounds crazy. It does not sound crazy to me, Rias said, turning to face him fully, her expression soft in a way that made his chest ache with something warm and overwhelming. It sounds exactly like the kind of certainty that has carried us this far. I meant every word as well, Issei. There was never a version of that offer I would have accepted. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation, lacing her fingers through his the way she had done so many times now since this ordeal began, the gesture familiar and grounding despite the strange, cavernous darkness surrounding them. So what now? He asked. The voice said the way home was close. As if summoned by his words, a soft light began to bloom at the far edge of the chamber, faint at first, then growing steadily brighter, warm and golden in a way that reminded Issei immediately of the torch chamber they had left behind, though this light felt different somehow, less like the glow of an ancient relic and more like ordinary sunlight filtering through an ordinary window. That looks different from everything else we have seen here, Rias said cautiously, though hope had crept unmistakably into her voice. Only one way to find out, Issei said, and together they moved toward the light, crossing the vast, empty chamber slowly, side by side, either of them willing to rush ahead of the other even now, so close to whatever waited beyond. The light grew steadily larger as they approached, resolving gradually into the unmistakable shape of a doorway, ordinary and plain, but glowing with warmth that felt, for the first time since they had fallen into this place, entirely and unmistakably real. Do you feel that? Rias asked quietly, slowing as they drew close. Yeah, Issei said, his voice hushed with something between disbelief and hope. It feels like home. They stood before the glowing doorway together, hands still joined, and for a moment neither of them moved, both of them acutely aware that whatever lay beyond it would mark the end of this strange, terrifying, unexpectedly transformative journey through a place that had tested every fear and every hope either of them carried. Issei glanced at Rias, and she looked back at him with an expression that mirrored his own, equal parts relief and reluctance, as though some quiet part of both of them recognized that the honesty and closeness forged in this endless yellow maze might prove harder to carry forward once the ordinary world reclaimed them. Whatever happens when we step through, Issei said quietly, I am not letting this place take back what we found here. Not the way we feel about each other. Not any of it. Neither am I, Rias said firmly, squeezing his hand. We chose honesty over an easy escape once already. I do not intend to abandon that choice now simply because home is finally within reach. Issei nodded, drew a steadying breath, and together they stepped through the glowing doorway, the warm light swallowing them entirely, and for one suspended, weightless moment, either of them could tell whether they were falling or rising, whether they were leaving the maze behind or being drawn even deeper into whatever final mystery still waited for them on the other side. Chapter 17. The warmth of the light gave way slowly to a gentler sensation, solid ground beneath their feet, cool air brushing against their skin, and when Issei finally opened his eyes, he found himself standing not in the Occult Research Club, not in any place he immediately recognized, but in a quiet, moonlit garden surrounded by tall hedges trimmed into careful, orderly shapes, a fountain trickling softly somewhere nearby. Bucho, he said, glancing around in confusion, still gripping her hand tightly. This is not the club room. Rias turned in a slow circle, her expression caught somewhere between relief and fresh uncertainty. No, she agreed slowly. It is not. But I recognize this place, Issei. This is the private garden behind my family's estate in the Underworld. I played here as a child. That is definitely progress, Issei said, cautious relief warring with lingering wariness after everything the maze had already shown them. But why here? Why not straight back to Kuoh? Before Rias could answer, a soft, warm voice spoke from somewhere behind them, achingly familiar, and Issei turned to see, impossibly, both of their families standing together beneath the moonlit hedges, his own parents beside Rias's, all of them smiling with a warmth that looked, for the first time since the mother's voice in the corridor, entirely genuine rather than hollow or wrong. Careful, Drake rumbled immediately, his voice sharp with warning even as the scene before them remained perfectly still and peaceful. Partner, I cannot say with certainty whether this is real. The nature of this place has not changed simply because you have passed its final trial. Issei relayed the warning quietly, and Rias's grip on his hand tightened, though either of them retreated from the sight of their families standing together in the moonlight, both of them wanting, desperately, for it to be true. You have both done so well, Issei's mother said, stepping forward, her voice exactly as warm and familiar as it had always been, without the hollow ache the false voice in the corridor had carried. "We are so proud of you, sweetheart. Come home now. You have earned your rest." Issei felt tears prick at his eyes despite himself, the pull of the image every bit as powerful as it had been before, and yet something about it felt different this time, less like a desperate lure and more like a genuine question being posed to him, patient rather than urgent. "Is this real?" he asked aloud, unsure whether he addressed Drake, Rias, or the impossible garden itself. "After everything we already went through, after we already refused the easy way out once, is this actually it?" The garden held its breath, the smiling families remaining perfectly still, and slowly, the ancient voice from the library returned once more, gentler now than Issei had ever heard it, speaking directly into both of their minds at once. "This is the final honesty this place requires of you," it said. "Not a trap, not exactly, and not entirely a gift either. This garden is real, in the sense that it reflects what waits for you both should you choose to accept it as your ending. But endings, like doors, come in many forms, and not every true ending is the one offered first." "What does that mean?" Rias asked, her voice steady despite the clear strain of standing before an image of everyone she loved most, offering exactly what she had wanted since the moment they fell into the maze. "It means," the voice said, "that you may step forward now and rejoin your families exactly as you see them, waking tomorrow with only a vague memory of strange dreams, the deeper trials you faced already fading gently, though not entirely forgotten this time, since you have already proven unwilling to trade away what matters most between you. Or you may choose to walk further still, past this garden, toward an ending less immediate, less comfortable, but shaped entirely by your own continued effort rather than granted freely by this place. I will not tell you which path is correct. I have learned, across many, many travelers, that the correct path differs for every pair who reaches this point." Issei looked at the smiling image of his parents, warmth and longing aching in his chest at the mere sight of them after everything he had endured, and then looked at Rias beside him, her own eyes bright with unshed tears as she studied her family's familiar, beloved faces in the moonlight. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly, unwilling to make this particular choice without her, exactly as he had refused to make every choice without her since this entire ordeal began. Rias was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving slowly between the garden, her family, and finally settling on Issei himself, something fierce and thoughtful passing behind her violet eyes. "I want to go home," she admitted softly. "More than almost anything, Issei, I want exactly what this garden offers. But I find myself wondering whether an ending granted so easily, after everything we have proven about ourselves, would carry the same weight as one earned entirely by our own hands." "You think this is another test," Issei said, understanding dawning slowly. "I think," Rias said carefully, "that this place has shown us, again and again, that the version of events offered most easily is rarely the one worth choosing. I do not know if walking further is the right choice. But I know that choosing the comfortable path simply because it is comfortable has never once served us well since we arrived here." Issei looked once more at his parents, still smiling patiently in the moonlight, and felt the ache of longing settle, gradually, into something steadier and more resolved. "Then let us walk further," he said, though his voice caught slightly on the words. "I want to go home too, Bucho, more than I can really put into words. But I trust you. If your instincts say there is more honesty waiting for us further on, I would rather find it than settle for the first door that opens." The garden rippled gently at their decision, the smiling families beginning to fade, not with the violent dissolution of the shadow creature or the abrupt vanishing of the false door in the white room, but slowly, gently, almost approvingly, as though the choice itself had been anticipated and welcomed rather than merely tested. "Then walk on," the ancient voice said, warmth threading unmistakably through its final words, "and know that whatever waits at the true end of this journey, you have already proven yourselves worthy of finding it together." The moonlit garden dissolved entirely around them, and Issei felt Rias's hand tighten in his as the world shifted once more beneath their feet, carrying them onward into whatever final stretch of this strange, transformative journey still remained, either of them certain what waited ahead, both of them certain only that they would face it exactly as they had faced everything else, together, and without hesitation. Chapter 18. When the shifting sensation finally settled, Issei found solid ground beneath his feet once more, though this new space bore no resemblance to the garden, the yellow halls, or any other chamber they had passed through so far. They stood at the edge of a vast, still lake, its surface perfectly smooth beneath a sky that held no sun, no moon, no stars, only an even, silvery light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is different again," Rias said quietly, studying the strange, sourceless light with open curiosity now rather than pure caution, some measure of trust in the process having settled into her over the course of their long journey. "I do not sense hostility here. Only stillness." Issei crouched at the edge of the lake and looked down, half expecting the same blank, reflectionless water they had fled from earlier in their journey, but this time his own face looked back at him clearly, tired and travel-worn but unmistakably real, Rias's reflection appearing beside his own a moment later, as she knelt next to him. "It shows us as we are," she said softly, reaching out to touch the surface gently, sending small ripples across the reflection without disturbing its essential clarity. "No illusions. No temptations. Just us. After everything else this place has thrown at us," Issei said, "I am almost suspicious of how normal this feels." "Perhaps normal is exactly what we have earned," Rias said, a tired, genuine smile touching her lips as she looked at their reflections together, side by side, hands still loosely joined even in the rippling water. "Perhaps this is simply a place to rest before whatever comes next." They sat together at the edge of the still lake for a long while, either of them speaking, content simply to exist in a space that demanded nothing further of them for the moment, the silvery light warm and gentle against their skin despite its lack of any visible source. Issei found his thoughts drifting back over everything they had faced together since the moment the strange magic circle had swallowed them both, the wall of desperate warnings left by countless strangers, the glowing cavern where they had first spoken their feelings aloud, the shadow creature's final trial, the ache of the moonlit garden and the family they had chosen, together, to walk past rather than embrace. "Do you think we made the right call back there?" he asked eventually, breaking the comfortable silence. "Walking past the garden, I mean. Choosing to keep going instead of taking the easy ending." Rias considered the question seriously, her eyes still fixed on their calm reflections in the water. "I believe so," she said finally. "Though I will admit, some part of me will always wonder what waited for us had we stepped forward and accepted it instead. That is, perhaps, simply the nature of any difficult choice. We rarely receive the comfort of certainty afterward." "Yeah," Issei agreed. "But for what it is worth, I would make the same choice again. Walking beside you, even through something uncertain, still beats an easy ending without you in it." Rias leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and Issei wrapped an arm around her without a second thought, both of them watching the silvery light play softly across the still surface of the lake. "You say the sweetest things, Issei Hyoudou," she murmured, a quiet, contented warmth in her voice that he had rarely heard from her even before any of this began. "I am fortunate beyond measure that it was you who fell into this place beside me, and no one else." "Same here, Bucho," he said softly. "Every single time." They rested there a while longer, the strange lake offering neither threat nor further trial, only quiet, until finally, far across the water, a single point of warm, golden light appeared, small at first, then growing steadily brighter, exactly as the doorway in the shadow creature's chamber had grown before it swallowed them whole. "There," Rias said, straightening, pointing toward the distant light. "I believe that is our path forward." "Guess rest time is over," Issei said, rising and offering her a hand up, which she took without hesitation, brushing silvery dust from her torn and travel-worn clothes as she stood. "For now," Rias agreed, lacing her fingers through his once more. "Though I suspect, whatever waits at the source of that light, we will face it far better rested than we would have otherwise." Together they turned to walk along the edge of the still, silver lake, the distant golden light guiding them steadily forward, and for the first time since falling into this endless, shifting place, Issei found that the fear which had gripped him so tightly at the very beginning had settled, gradually, into something quieter and far more steady, a certainty born not from any promise the maze itself had offered, but from the simple, unshakable fact of the woman walking steadily beside him, hand in his, exactly where she intended to stay. Chapter 19. The golden light across the silver lake grew steadily larger as they approached, resolving at last into another plain, ordinary doorway standing impossibly at the water's edge, framed by nothing but the still, silvery air around it. Issei felt the scale in his pocket pulse once, warm and steady, as they stopped before it. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at Rias. "Always," she said, and together they stepped through. The light swallowed them exactly as it had before, and when it released them, Issei blinked against a sudden, disorienting familiarity. They stood once more in a room lined with yellow wallpaper, buzzing fluorescent lights humming steadily overhead, damp carpet beneath their feet, and for one horrible, plummeting moment, he thought the entire journey, the cavern, the library, the golden torch, the confession, all of it had simply looped back to the very beginning. "This cannot be right," he said, turning in a slow circle. "Bucho, this looks exactly like where we started." Rias moved to the center of the room, studying the walls with a critical eye, and after a moment, shook her head slowly. "Not exactly the same. Look closer. The stains on the carpet are different. The pattern of the wallpaper repeats at a slightly wider interval. This is a similar room, Issei, not the same one." "Similar rooms, familiar problems," Drake rumbled from within the gauntlet, his voice notably stronger now than it had been for most of their journey. "Partner, I believe we have crossed some manner of threshold. The suppression on my power has eased considerably since we passed through that golden door." Issei tested the observation, calling up a small measure of power without bothering to boost, and felt it answer readily, warm and present in a way it had not been since before they fell into this place at all. "You are right," he said, relief flooding through him. "I can feel you clearly now, no static, no distance." "That is meaningful," Rias said, a cautious hope brightening her expression as she tested her own magic, a full orb of destruction energy gathering steadily in her palm and holding its shape without the flickering weakness that had plagued her since their arrival. "If this place is loosening its hold on our power, we may genuinely be nearing the true edge of it." They explored the room carefully, and Issei noticed, near the far corner, a detail that had not been present in any of the identical rooms they passed through at the very beginning of their journey, a small, framed photograph resting on the floor, propped against the wall as though someone had left it there deliberately. He crossed the room and picked it up, and his breath caught in his throat. It showed the entire Gremory peerage, gathered in the clubroom, Aquino and Kiba and Kaneko and Asia and Zenobia and Gasper, all of them frozen mid-laugh in some ordinary afternoon Issei only vaguely remembered, the photograph slightly worn at the edges as though it had been handled many times. "That is from 2 years ago," Rias said softly, appearing at his shoulder and staring at the image with open longing. "I remember that day. Aquino had just made too much tea and insisted we all drink it before it went cold." "Why would this place have this?" Issei asked quietly, turning the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting that was unmistakably Rias's own, though either of them had written it, were a few simple words. "They are waiting for you. Do not make them wait forever." Rias stared at the message for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking. "I do not know whether this is meant as comfort or as pressure," she admitted. "But either way, it is a reminder that our absence has consequences beyond ourselves. My peerage will be searching for us. Sona will have alerted my brother by now. There will be worry, and likely fear, on the other side of whatever door eventually lets us through. Then we owe it to them to get back as fast as we can," Issei said, setting the photograph down gently on a nearby shelf that had not been there a moment before, as though the room itself adjusted to accommodate their choices. "Let us keep moving." Chapter 20. They left the room and found the corridor beyond it noticeably different from anything they had walked before, wider, better lit, the buzzing fluorescent hum replaced by a steadier, gentler illumination that made the yellow wallpaper look almost cheerful rather than oppressive. Issei kept a careful watch regardless, unwilling to let his guard down simply because the surroundings had softened. "Do you think we are close now?" he asked, glancing at Rias as they walked. "I believe so," she said. "Though I have learned not to assume anything in this place until we are standing back in the club room with our own eyes." The corridor eventually opened into a chamber unlike any they had encountered, circular and vast, its walls lined not with wallpaper or stone but with what looked like an enormous, spinning array of doors, dozens of them, each one slightly different in color and design, rotating slowly around the chamber's perimeter like the hands of some impossible clock. That is new, Issei said, watching the doors cycle past. How are we supposed to pick the right one out of all that? Before Rias could answer, a familiar warmth bloomed in Issei's jacket pocket, and he pulled the dragon scale free to find it glowing brighter than it ever had, its ancient markings shifting rapidly across its surface. I think it is trying to tell us something, he said, holding it up. The scale's light lanced outward suddenly, a thin beam cutting across the spinning array and striking one door among the dozens, a plain, unremarkable wooden door that looked, against the ornate and colorful designs surrounding it, almost deliberately humble. That one, Rias said, already moving toward it despite the door's continued rotation around the chamber's edge. Issei, we need to time this carefully. If we miss it, we may need to wait for a full rotation before it comes around again, and I do not know how long that would take in a place like this. Copy that, Issei said, watching the plain door's steady arc around the chamber, judging its speed, calculating the moment they would need to move. On my mark. 3, 2, 1 now. They ran together, timing their approach perfectly, and Issei reached the handle just as the door swept past their position, wrenching it open against its own momentum with a strength boosted by adrenaline more than magic, and together they threw themselves through the opening a heartbeat before it would have carried the door out of reach entirely. They tumbled through into a small, quiet room, breathless from the effort, and Issei helped Rias to her feet, both of them laughing slightly despite the strangeness of what they had just done, the shared adrenaline of a challenge overcome together settling into something warm and giddy between them. That was reckless, Rias said, though she was smiling. Reckless is kind of my specialty, Issei said, grinning back at her. Where are we now, though? The room around them was small and plain, but unlike every other space they had passed through, it held a single, ordinary wooden table at its center, and resting atop the table, and possibly, sat Rias's small notebook, the very one she had been writing in the moment the magic circle first swallowed them, its pages still open to the entry she never finished. That is mine, Rias breathed, crossing the room quickly to lift it with careful, reverent hands. Issei, this is the notebook from the club room. How is this possible? Maybe this place collects things, Issei suggested, though the sight of something so ordinary, so completely tied to the world they had left behind, made his chest ache with sudden, sharp longing. Pieces of what people lose when they fall in here. Rias flipped through the notebook slowly, and near the final written page, in her own familiar handwriting, though she had no memory of writing it, a new line had been added beneath her unfinished entry about the strange magic circle. You are almost home. Trust what you have built along the way, and it will carry you the rest of the distance. I do not know how to feel about a place that keeps giving us cryptic reassurance in our own handwriting, Issei admitted. Nor do I, Rias said, tucking the notebook carefully into her torn sleeve. But I have decided to simply trust it, for now, since distrust has gotten us little further than trust has, and trust, at least, feels considerably less exhausting. Chapter 21. They left the small room with the notebook tucked safely away, and the corridor beyond it sloped gently upward again, the air growing warmer, carrying with it a faint, unmistakable scent that made both of them stop in their tracks. Is that? Issei started, inhaling slowly. Incense, Rias finished, her eyes widening. That is the incense Aquino burns in the club room. Issei, that is not a memory or an illusion. I would know that scent anywhere. They quickened their pace, following the scent through a series of gentle turns until the corridor terminated abruptly in a wall that looked, impossibly, exactly like the wall behind Rias's desk in the Occult Research Club, complete with the same faint water stain near the ceiling that none of them had ever bothered to fix. This has to be it, Issei said, heart pounding. Bucho, this has to be the way home. Rias reached out and pressed her palm flat against the wall, and where her skin made contact, faint cracks of golden light began to spread outward, exactly like the pattern of the original magic circle that had swallowed them at the very beginning, though warmer now, steadier, entirely unlike the sickly pale yellow glow of that first fateful night. I feel resistance, she said, brow furrowing in concentration. Something is testing whether we are truly ready, or perhaps whether we still doubt ourselves. Issei, give me your hand. He did so immediately, and the moment their joined hands pressed together against the golden cracks, the light surged brighter, spreading fully across the wall's surface until it took on the unmistakable shape of a doorway, warm and inviting, the faint outline of the actual occult research club visible beyond it, blurred but real. Akino's desk and Kiba's favorite chair and the tall windows overlooking the old school courtyard all faintly discernible through the golden haze. That is really it, Issei breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Butcho, we are actually looking at home. We are, Rias said, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, tears slipped freely down her cheeks, tears of relief rather than fear, and Issei reached up without thinking to brush them away gently with his thumb, cupping her face the same way she had cupped his back in the golden torch chamber. Hey, he said softly. We made it. You did it, Butcho. We did it. Together, she said, laughing through her tears, leaning briefly into his touch before straightening and squaring her shoulders, the familiar, composed strength returning to her posture even as warmth remained plainly visible in her eyes. Shall we go home, Issei? Yeah, he said, taking her hand fully in his once more. Let us go home. They stepped toward the golden doorway together, and just as they reached its threshold, a low, rumbling voice spoke from somewhere behind them, not hostile, not threatening, but heavy with a gravity that stopped them both in their tracks regardless. Before you cross, the voice said, and Issei recognized it immediately as the same ancient presence from the library, though it felt closer now, more present, as though it had chosen to manifest fully rather than simply speak into their minds from some distant fragment of memory. One final matter requires your attention, Dragon Bearer, Devil Queen. What you carry through this door will not remain hidden once you return to your world. Choices made here echo forward. What do you mean? Rias asked, turning to face the source of the voice, though nothing visible stood behind them in the plain corridor. I mean, the voice said, that the bond forged within these walls, the honesty spoken aloud in the golden chamber, the choices refused and the choices embraced, all of it will follow you home, whether you are ready for others to see it or not. Your peerage, your families, the world you return to, all of it will sense the change in you, even if you say nothing aloud. Are you prepared for that truth to walk through the door beside you? Issei looked at Rias, and found her already looking back at him, something steady and unafraid settling behind her violet eyes despite the weight of the question. Yeah, Issei said, answering for both of them though he had not been asked to. I am ready. I do not want to hide what happened here, or how I feel about her. Not anymore. Nor do I, Rias said firmly, squeezing his hand. We have already chosen honesty over comfort more times than I can count since falling into this place. I do not intend to abandon that choice the moment we are finally free to do otherwise. The ancient voice was silent for a long moment, and then, warm with something that sounded almost like satisfaction, it spoke one final time. Then go, both of you, and carry what you have built forward without fear. Few travelers answer so readily, or so completely. You have more than earned your way home. Chapter 22. The golden doorway pulsed once, brilliant and warm, and together Issei and Rias stepped through it, the strange, shifting weightlessness of transition settling over them one final time before solid, familiar ground rose up to meet their feet. Issei opened his eyes to the achingly ordinary sight of the Occult Research Club, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, Akino's tea set resting undisturbed on its usual shelf, Kiba's favorite chair positioned exactly where it always sat. We are home, he said, voice hushed with disbelief even as relief crashed over him in a wave so powerful his knees nearly buckled. Butcho, we are actually home. Rias turned in a slow circle, taking in every familiar detail with an expression of open, unguarded wonder, before her eyes landed on the small clock mounted above the doorway, and her expression shifted sharply into confusion. Issei, look at the time. Look at the date on that calendar. Issei followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. The clock read barely a few minutes past the time they had first been swallowed by the strange magic circle, and the calendar beside it still showed the same date they had left behind. That cannot be right, he said slowly. We were gone for days. Weeks, maybe, based on how much ground we covered. Perhaps time moves differently between that place and our own, Rias said, though uncertainty colored her voice. Or perhaps something else entirely is happening. I do not know which possibility unsettles me more. Before either of them could puzzle over it further, the club room door burst open, and Akino stood in the frame, her usual composed elegance replaced by open, startled relief the moment her eyes landed on the two of them. Rias! Issei! Where have you been? You vanished mid-sentence, right in front of me, not even a full minute ago. I turned around to fetch more tea, and when I turned back, you were simply gone. A minute, Issei repeated, stunned. Akino, we were gone for what felt like weeks. Maybe longer. Akino's expression shifted from relief to sharp concern. That is not possible, Issei. I promise you, from where I stood, you vanished and reappeared within the same breath. I did not even have time to call for help. Rias exchanged a long, troubled look with Issei, the weight of the discrepancy settling heavily between them. Then whatever that place was, she said slowly, it exists entirely outside the normal flow of time as we understand it. Days, weeks, an entire private eternity for us, and yet here, in this room, only a single minute has passed. That is either really lucky, Issei said, still processing the strangeness of it, or somehow even more unsettling than everything else that happened in there. Perhaps both, Rias said, though a small, relieved smile finally broke through her lingering confusion. At the very least, it means no one has spent sleepless nights searching for us, wondering if we were lost forever. That I will gladly accept as good fortune, however strange its origin. Akino studied them both closely, her sharp eyes catching details neither Issei nor Rias had considered, the torn and travel-worn state of their clothes, the faint exhaustion still etched into both their expressions despite the relief, and something else too, something subtler, in the way their hands remained joined even now, back in the safety of the ordinary clubroom. Something happened to you both, Akino said, her voice softening with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. Something significant, unless I am very much mistaken. Issei glanced at Rias, remembering the ancient voice's final question, the choice they had already made to carry their honesty forward without hiding it, and found, to his own quiet surprise, that he felt no hesitation at all in answering plainly. Yeah, he said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his exhaustion. Something happened. Something good, actually, even though most of it was pretty terrifying while it was happening. Rias squeezed his hand and looked at Akino with a warmth and openness that clearly startled her oldest friend, though delighted surprise quickly followed the initial shock. Issei and I have quite a lot to explain, Rias said. But perhaps it would be best explained to the entire peerage together, rather than told twice. Akino's gaze flicked between their joined hands one more time, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. Oh, I think I already understand a great deal more than you realize, she said, delight evident in her voice. But yes, let us gather everyone. I believe this is a story worth hearing properly, from the very beginning. Chapter 23. Within the hour, the entire peerage had gathered in the clubroom, Kiba leaning casually against the far wall, Kaneko perched on the arm of the sofa with a bag of snacks already in hand, Asia and Zenobia sitting close together with matching expressions of worried curiosity, Gasper peeking out cautiously from behind a bookshelf where he had retreated the moment the room grew crowded. Issei and Rias sat together on the couch, hands still joined, and slowly, carefully, began recounting everything that had happened since the strange magic circle first swallowed them. They spoke of the endless yellow halls, the wall of desperate warnings left by countless lost travelers before them, the glowing cavern where honesty had first bloomed fully between them, the freestanding library door, and the ancient dragon's scale, the shadow creature's cruel offer and their shared refusal to accept it, the golden torch chamber where they had finally spoken their feelings aloud without reservation, and the moonlit garden they had chosen, together, to walk past rather than embrace. By the time they finished, the room had fallen into a thoughtful, weighted silence, Asia dabbing quietly at her eyes, Zenovia's arms crossed tightly as though physically restraining herself from immediately volunteering to hunt down whatever remained of that strange dimension and destroy it outright, Kiba's usual easy smile replaced by something more solemn and considering. So let me make sure I understand correctly, Zenovia said finally, her voice tight with barely restrained protectiveness. You were both trapped in some manner of interdimensional pocket, facing hostile entities and psychological trials, for what felt like weeks from your perspective, and the two of you handled all of it entirely alone, with no way to call for help. That is more or less accurate, Rias admitted. though I would not say we handled it entirely alone. We had each other, and that, more than anything else, is what carried us through. You should have had backup, Zenobia said firmly, though her sharp tone softened somewhat as she glanced between Issei and Rias, taking in the quiet, unshakable closeness that had clearly grown between them. Still, I am glad you both made it back safely. Truly. We are all glad, Kiba said, offering a small, genuine smile. Though I confess, Issei, I am somewhat envious that you managed such an adventure without any of the rest of us along to help. Trust me, Issei said, managing a tired laugh despite everything, you would not have wanted to be there for most of it. There was a lake with no reflection. I still have nightmares about that lake. Kaneko, quiet until now, finally spoke up from her perch on the sofa arm, her flat, matter-of-fact tone carrying more warmth than usual beneath its surface. You two are holding hands, she observed simply, gesturing with a snack still clutched in her other hand. That is new. The room's attention shifted immediately, and Issei felt heat rise in his face despite everything they had already survived together, while Rias, to his surprise, simply smiled and lifted their joined hands slightly for everyone to see more clearly. It is new, she confirmed, no trace of hesitation in her voice. Issei and I have decided, after everything we endured together, that we no longer wish to keep certain feelings hidden. I love him. He loves me. I intend for that to be simply and openly true from this point forward, regardless of whatever complications it might eventually bring. A brief, stunned silence followed her declaration, quickly broken by Akino's delighted laugh and a scattered round of congratulations from the rest of the peerage, Asia clasping her hands together with genuine joy, even Zenobia offering a small, approving nod despite her earlier sternness. Issei sat through it all with a warmth spreading steadily through his chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion or relief and everything to do with the simple, uncomplicated joy of no longer needing to hide something that had, until recently, felt too precious and too fragile to speak aloud. For what it is worth, Kiba said once the initial excitement settled, I think that place, whatever it truly was, did the two of you a strange sort of favor, however terrifying the process must have been. Perhaps, Rias said thoughtfully, glancing at Issei with a soft, private warmth that had nothing to do with the rest of the room's attention. Though I would not wish that particular favor on anyone else. Still, I cannot deny what it gave us in the end. As the peerage settled into easier, more relaxed conversation around them, questions about the strange magic circle's origin, plans to investigate whether such a phenomenon might recur, quiet reassurances exchanged all around, Issei found his gaze drawn, almost involuntarily, toward the exact spot on the floor where the original magic circle had first appeared. It looked perfectly ordinary now, bare wood, nothing more, and yet a faint, prickling unease settled over him regardless, some quiet instinct refusing to fully believe that whatever they had left behind in that endless yellow maze was truly finished with them. Chapter 24. That night, once the peerage had finally dispersed and the clubroom fell quiet again, Issei lingered behind, unwilling to leave just yet, and found Rias still seated on the familiar couch, her small notebook open once more in her lap, the strange addition to her unfinished entry still visible in her own unfamiliar handwriting. Trouble sleeping already? He asked gently, settling beside her. Something like that, Rias admitted, closing the notebook slowly. I keep thinking about what that voice said, just before we crossed through the final door. About choices echoing forward. I cannot shake the feeling that our story with that place is not entirely finished, however much I wish otherwise. Yeah, Issei admitted quietly. I have had the same feeling all evening. Like something is still watching even here. As if summoned by his words, the dragon scale in his jacket pocket, which had gone dark and quiet the moment they crossed back into their own world, suddenly flared warm again, its ancient markings shifting rapidly across its surface in a pattern neither of them had seen it take before. Issei pulled it free, and both of them watched, transfixed, as the markings slowly resolved into unmistakable shapes, an image of the yellow corridors, the spinning array of doors, and faintly, at the very edge of the pattern, the shadow creature's serpentine silhouette, no longer scattered into motes of light, but whole again, coiled and waiting. That is not possible, Rias breathed. We passed that trial. It dissolved. It told us we had already proven ourselves. Drag, Issei said quickly, alarm sharpening his voice. Are you seeing this? I am, partner, the dragon rumbled, his tone graver than Issei had heard it even during their most dangerous moments within the maze itself. And I do not believe this is merely a lingering echo. Something in that place has not finished with the two of you. I suspect our return was not quite as clean an escape as we believed. The scales' glow steadied, and the ancient voice from the library spoke once more, faint and distant this time, as though reaching across a far greater gap than it had needed to bridge before. Forgive the intrusion, it said. I did not wish to trouble your rest so soon after your return. But you should know, both of you, that the trial you passed concerned only the bond between yourselves. A deeper trial remains, one that concerns the bond between yourselves and those you have sworn to protect. The maze is not finished testing what you are willing to fight for. What does that mean? Rias demanded, her earlier relief hardening quickly into focused resolve. Is my peerage in danger? Is that what you are telling us? Danger has not yet arrived, the voice said carefully. But it is coming, drawn by the same disturbance that first opened a path for the two of you to fall through. What slipped loose when that circle first tore open has not fully returned to where it belongs. I tell you this now so that you are not caught unprepared when it finally does arrive. The scales' glow faded slowly, the voice retreating once more into silence, and Issei and Rias sat together in the quiet aftermath, the warmth of their earlier relief now tempered by a fresh, unwelcome weight settling over both of them. We are not done with this, Issei said quietly, though there was no fear in his voice this time. Only steady, resolute determination. Are we? No, Rias said, closing her hand firmly around his. I do not believe we are. But whatever comes next, Issei, we face it exactly as we have faced everything else so far. Together, he said, and this time the word carried none of the desperate uncertainty it had held back in that first terrifying moment on the damp yellow carpet. It carried only quiet, unshakable certainty, forged carefully across every trial they had already survived, and Issei found, despite the fresh danger clearly gathering somewhere ahead of them, that he was not afraid, not truly, not so long as Rias remained exactly where she was, hand in his, ready to face whatever waited next. Chapter 25. Morning arrived with a deceptive ordinariness that made the previous night's warning feel almost distant, sunlight spilling warm and golden through the clubroom windows, the familiar sounds of Kuoh Academy waking up around them, students calling to one another in the courtyard below, the faint clatter of the kendo club already practicing near the old gymnasium. Issei arrived early, unable to sleep for more than a few restless hours, and found Rias already there ahead of him, her notebook spread open on the desk, several new pages filled with careful, methodical notes. You did not sleep either, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Not particularly, Rias admitted, not looking up from her writing. I have been trying to reconstruct everything I know about the original magic circle, searching for any detail that might explain what the voice meant by something slipping loose. I believe I may have found something. She turned the notebook around to show him a rough sketch of the circle as she remembered it, its pattern annotated with small, precise notes in the margins. Here, she said, tapping a section near the circle's outer edge. This portion of the pattern does not close properly. I noticed it that first night but dismissed it as an artifact of the corruption I assumed was affecting the array. Now I believe it was never corrupted at all. It was designed this way, deliberately left open. Designed by who? Issei asked, frowning at the sketch. That is precisely what I intend to find out, Rias said, closing the notebook with a decisive snap. I have already sent word to my brother, explaining what happened in careful, measured terms. He will want to investigate personally, and Sona will likely wish to examine the original site of the circle as well, given her own expertise in barrier magic. As if summoned by the mention of her name, the clubroom door opened, and Sona Citri stepped inside, her expression composed as always, though a sharpness in her eyes suggested she had already heard at least some version of the previous day's events. Rias, she said by way of greeting, I received your message this morning. I would like to see the exact spot where this circle originally appeared, if you are willing to show me. Of course, Rias said, rising immediately. Issei, will you join us? Wouldn't miss it, he said, falling into step beside her as they led Sona to the precise section of floor where the strange, pale yellow circle had first bloomed to life days ago from their own perspective, though only hours ago by the reckoning of the ordinary world. Sona knelt and examined the bare wooden floorboards closely, her fingers tracing patterns invisible to Issei's eyes, her expression growing increasingly troubled the longer she studied it. There is residual energy here, she said finally, straightening. Faint, but present, and it carries a signature I do not recognize, similar in nature to certain interdimensional theory I have studied, though considerably more sophisticated than anything I have encountered in practical application. Rias, whatever created this circle, understood dimensional architecture at a level far beyond typical devil sorcery. Could it have been an accident? Issei asked. Some kind of natural phenomenon, maybe, given how old this town's ley lines are supposed to be? Possible, but unlikely, Sona said. Natural phenomena rarely display this degree of deliberate structure. I believe, Rias, that someone or something opened this circle intentionally, and given what you have described about being unable to close it or navigate it predictably, I suspect its creator intended precisely the outcome you experienced. A trap, calibrated specifically to catch someone of significant power. The three of them stood together in troubled silence for a long moment, the weight of the implication settling heavily over the room. If that is true, Rias said slowly, then someone deliberately targeted Issei and myself. The question that remains is why, and toward what purpose? I do not have an answer to that yet, Sona admitted. But I will begin researching immediately. In the meantime, I would advise increased caution from both of you. Whoever or whatever engineered this circle clearly possesses both the capability and the intent to attempt something similar again. Chapter 26. Sona departed within the hour, promising to return with whatever information her research uncovered, and Issei found himself alone with Rias once more in the quiet clubroom, the earlier warmth of morning sunlight now tinged with the weight of everything Sona's investigation had confirmed. He watched Rias pace slowly near the window, her expression distant and calculating in the way it always grew when she was working through a problem too large to solve in a single sitting. Hey, he said gently, crossing the room to stand beside her. Whatever this turns out to be, we are not facing it the way we faced that maze. Alone, cut off, no way to call for help. We have your whole peerage now. Sona. Your brother. Whatever comes for us, it comes for all of us together. Rias stopped pacing and looked at him, something softening in her expression despite the tension still evident in her shoulders. You are right, of course. I suppose old habits are difficult to shake. After everything we endured relying only on each other, it feels strange to remember that we are not, in fact, entirely alone in facing what comes next. We will still have each other too, Issei said, reaching for her hand. That part does not change. It just means we also get back up this time. A small, genuine smile finally broke through her earlier tension. Back up does sound appealing, admittedly, after the week we have had, however briefly it registered on the calendar. They stood together at the window for a while, watching students move about the courtyard below, blissfully unaware of anything strange having occurred within the old school building at all, and Issei found himself grateful, in a quiet, uncomplicated way, for the sheer ordinariness of the scene, birds calling from the trees, laughter drifting up from a group of first years near the gate. The mundane rhythm of a world that had continued turning without them even as their own private eternity unfolded somewhere just beyond its edge. Do you think whatever is coming will give us any warning? Issei asked eventually. Or is this going to be another situation where we get pulled into something with zero preparation? I genuinely do not know, Rias admitted. Though if the voice in that place is to be trusted, I suspect we will have at least some warning before it truly arrives. It seemed intent on preparing us rather than simply abandoning us to face a surprise unprepared. That is something, I guess, Issei said. Not a lot, but something. Drake's voice rumbled quietly from within the gauntlet, thoughtful and measured. For what it is worth, partner, I sense no immediate threat approaching, not yet. Whatever slipped loose from that place, if the voice's warning holds true, it has not yet drawn close enough for me to detect its presence clearly. That likely means you have time, at least a little, to prepare properly rather than react in a panic. Issei relayed this to Rias, who nodded slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders at the reassurance. Then let us use that time wisely, she said. Training, research, strengthening every resource available to us, rather than simply waiting anxiously for a threat that has not yet shown its face. Sounds like a plan, Issei said. Though I vote we also take at least one full day to just be normal for a while. We survived an entire hidden dimension together. I think we have earned a little bit of ordinary before the next crisis shows up. Rias laughed, soft and genuine, the sound easing something tight in Issei's own chest that he had not fully realized was still wound so tense since their return. Agreed, she said. One ordinary day, Issei Hyoudou, before we throw ourselves back into danger. I believe we have more than earned that much. She leaned against him, resting her head against his shoulder as they continued watching the courtyard below, and for a little while longer, either of them spoke of magic circles or ancient voices or shadows waiting somewhere just beyond the edge of their understanding, content simply to exist together in the quiet, ordinary sunlight of a world they had fought so hard to return to, even knowing, somewhere beneath the peace, that the story was far from finished. Chapter 27. True to their word, they spent the remainder of that day trying, with mixed success, to simply be ordinary, though ordinary proved harder to reclaim than either of them expected after everything they had endured. Issei found himself unconsciously reaching for Rias's hand at odd moments throughout the afternoon, a habit born from days spent never letting go for fear of losing her in the shifting dark, and Rias, rather than finding the habit strange, simply laced her fingers through his each time without comment, as though the gesture had become as natural to her as breathing. They walked together through the town after classes ended, past the small shops and cafes that lined the streets near Kuoh Academy, and Issei found himself watching Rias more closely than usual, noticing small things he had somehow never fully registered before, the way she tilted her head slightly when something amused her, the small, satisfied sound she made whenever she found a pastry she particularly liked, the quiet, contented hum she sometimes let slip when the afternoon light caught her hair just right. You are staring, Rias said eventually, amusement clear in her voice as they sat together at a small outdoor table, sharing a plate of pastries from her favorite bakery. Sorry, Issei said, though he did not look away. I guess I am still getting used to being allowed to look at you like this. Openly, I mean. Without pretending I am not completely gone for you. Rias's cheeks colored slightly, a rare and precious sight that Issei found himself treasuring immediately. I do not mind the staring, she admitted. Though I confess, I am still adjusting as well. It is strange, after keeping certain feelings carefully guarded for so long, to simply let them exist plainly in the open like this. Good strange or bad strange, Issei asked. Good, Rias said without hesitation. Very good, actually. They lingered at the small cafe long after finishing their pastries, simply talking, about nothing important, about everything that had nothing to do with magic circles or ancient dimensions, about favorite foods and half-remembered childhood stories and the small, ordinary hopes each of them carried for a future that, until recently, either of them might have hesitated to voice aloud. It was, Issei thought, watching sunlight filter gold and warm through the cafe's awning, exactly the kind of ordinary day he had promised they deserved, and if some quiet, watchful part of him remained aware of the shadow still gathering somewhere beyond the edges of their peace, he found he could set that awareness gently aside for a few hours, trusting that whatever came next, they would face it exactly as they had faced everything else so far. As evening settled over Kuoh and they finally made their way back toward the old school building, hand in hand beneath the sky gradually filling with early stars, Issei found himself glancing, almost involuntarily, toward the darkened windows of the Occult Research Club, half expecting to see some flicker of pale yellow light behind the glass, some sign that the maze had not truly finished with them after all. The windows remained dark and ordinary, reflecting only the deepening blue of the evening sky, and Issei let out a slow breath, some of the tension he had not realized he was carrying easing gradually from his shoulders. Nothing yet, Rias said quietly, following his gaze and understanding immediately what he had been searching for. Perhaps we truly do have a little more time before whatever is coming finally arrives. I will take it, Issei said, squeezing her hand as they climbed the front steps together. Every ordinary hour we get between now and then. As will I, Rias agreed, and together they stepped inside, the old building settling quietly around them for the night, its ordinary silence a welcome contrast to the buzzing, humming quiet of the endless yellow maze they had finally, against every terrible odd, managed to leave behind. Whatever waited ahead, whatever shadow still stirred somewhere beyond the edges of their understanding, they would meet it when it came, together, exactly as they had promised each other from the very first frightened moment they woke on that damp, unfamiliar carpet, and not one moment sooner than they had to. Chapter 28. Later that night, long after the rest of the peerage had gone their separate ways and the old school building had settled into full darkness, Issei lingered in the clubroom doorway, watching Rias gather her things by the soft light of her desk lamp, unwilling to let the day end just yet. She glanced up and caught him watching, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "You are hovering," she observed gently. "Guilty," Issei admitted, stepping fully into the room. "I guess some part of me is still not quite ready to let a door close between us, even an ordinary one like this." Rias set down the folder she had been organizing and crossed the room to stand before him, reaching up to rest her palm lightly against his chest, exactly over the place where the dragon's scales still rested in his jacket pocket, quiet now, its earlier warning settled into a watchful, waiting stillness. "Then do not think of it as a door closing," she said softly. "Think of it as one very long day finally coming to a peaceful end, with tomorrow simply waiting on the other side, exactly as ordinary days are meant to." "I like that better," Issei said, covering her hand with his own. "Tomorrow, then?" "Whatever it brings." "Whatever it brings," Rias agreed, rising slightly on her toes to press a soft, lingering kiss to his cheek before stepping back, her expression warm despite the quiet weight both of them still carried beneath the surface of the evening. "Rest well, Issei. Truly rest, if you can manage it. I suspect we will both need our strength before this is over." "You too, Bucho," he said, reluctantly releasing her hand as she gathered the last of her things. "I will see you first thing tomorrow." She paused at the door, glancing back at him with an expression that carried equal parts affection and quiet resolve. "Issei," she said, "whatever comes for us next, whatever that voice was warning us about, I want you to know that none of it changes what we found in that place. If anything, I believe it has only made it stronger." "Yeah," Issei said, meeting her eyes steadily across the darkened room. "Me too. Nothing coming for us is walking away with that." Rias smiled once more, warm and certain, before finally slipping out into the hallway, her footsteps fading gradually into the quiet of the old building. Issei remained a while longer, alone in the dim clubroom, the dragon's scales faint, steady warmth still present against his chest like a quiet promise of trials yet to come, and found, despite everything still gathering unseen somewhere beyond the edges of their understanding, that he felt more ready to face it than he had ever imagined possible on that first terrifying night when the floor of this very room had disappeared beneath his feet. Whatever waited ahead, he would meet it standing exactly where he intended to stay, beside her, for as long as it took.